Good evening. It's 6 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council for June the 20th, 2023. And we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the republic. Thank you. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Yes, council members Judith Chandler,
Present.
John Shada.
Here.
Julie Wolf,
Here.
Natalie Johnson.
Here.
Michelle Weatherholt.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune
Present.
and Mayor John Graham.
Present, thank you. And to be clear, Councillor Wolf is joining us via telephone tonight. Great, so we're all here. Okay, next item is the approval of the agenda. And before we get too far, I would like to mention to council that I generally try not to have such a busy agenda. Tonight is pretty heavily loaded. There's several things that we'd had on there for a time, and there's several things that came up that were timely, and I think we need to address. Also, next week, we will not be having a work session because it will be the CML convention in Aurora, and a number of us will be up there. And then the following Tuesday is the 4th of July, which is, we're going to celebrate that as a holiday. So we're going to be off for a couple of weeks. So tonight, I guess we're going to earn our pay. So councilors, I think you've all had an opportunity to look over the agenda. If you would, I would entertain a motion to
I'll
approve it.
move to approve the agenda as presented. I'll second.
Motion is second. Let's vote. Judy, how do you want us to do that?
Mayor.
I'm sorry, Michelle.
Is it possible to please move H1 and I1 before the presentations?
H1 and I1, the two hearings, to move them up before the presentations G. That's
Yes.
okay. That's my understanding. Okay, so that would be, we'd have the same content where the order would be changed. Personally, I would have no objection. Councilors, do you have any objection to do so? Staff?
Mayor, I don't see Cheyenne Village here. I can go ask Hannah what time they are coming. I could go check that real quick, but I don't see that they're here for the presentation. And I don't see Eli here either. Do you need Eli? Oh, he's not, so you can move that. Oh, he is coming. So we could check on both of those. I can go ask Hannah real quick, but it would allow that to move up if you so wanted me to go ask Hannah.
Does council have any objections to doing that?
Could we just remain flexible? If they come, we could have it earlier. I don't understand the reason why. I can see Eli. Why do you want Cheyenne Village moved up?
To respect staff's time also. Thank you.
Well, council, I guess if there's no objection, we go ahead and start off with the agenda, and then if Cheyenne Village arrives, we could go and entertain that. And the other item is H2. Is that correct, Michelle? The public hearing.
H1 and I1.
It's H1 and I1. Okay, so H2 would stay in the same order.
Yes.
And
There's a
Ralph, you
motion
said
and a
that.
second.
Okay, yeah, well, let us know if he intends to come. If not, okay.
Mayor, there's a motion and a second. Would you like me to restate my motion?
Yes, would you please?
I move to approve the agenda with the exception of H1 and I1, that we're going to be flexible this evening when the presenters arrive.
And I'll second that.
Okay. Motion a second for the amended agenda. Let's all vote.
Oh, no objection. I vote yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's push on then. Okay, next item would be public comment on non-agenda items. This is the time during the evening when any member of the public is invited to speak to a non-agenda item, that would be an item that's not on the agenda. You would have 3 minutes. So if there's anyone who would like to do so, this would be the time. Judy, did we have anyone showing interest?
No, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, apparently we don't have anyone for public comment on a non-agenda item tonight. Okay, let's move on to item F. That's the consent calendar, and we have 3 items. Approval of the June 6th, 2023 meeting minutes. Second, presentation of warrants. And third, approval of the contract with McUnderground LLC to install additional conduit for the fiber optic project. Now, any counselor can remove an item if they want to have it discussed separately. If not, I would seek a motion to approve and accept the consent calendar as published.
I move approval of the consent calendar.
Thank you, Natalie. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem. Let's vote.
I vote yes. Yes, thank you.
7-0 in favor.
Great, thank you. Next item, item G1, under presentations, we have proclamation number 0423, a proclamation declaring June 2023 as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex Pride Month. And I believe, Councillor Johnson, you prepared the proclamation. Would you read it, please?
Thank you. So this is a proclamation to recognize June as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex Pride Month 2023. Whereas during lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex, also known as LGBTQI+ Pride Month, we reflect on the progress we have made as a city in the fight for justice, inclusion, and equity, while reaffirming our commitment to do more to support the LGBTQI+ rights. Whereas in 2023 alone, state and local legislators have already introduced over 600 hateful laws targeting the LGBTQI+ community. Books about LGBTQI+ people are being banned from libraries. Transgender youth in over a dozen states have had their medically necessary healthcare banned. Whereas on November 19th, 2022, we experienced a devastating attack by a gunman wielding a long rifle at Club Q, an LGBTQI+ nightclub in Colorado Springs. Places that are supposed to be safe spaces of acceptance and celebration should never be turned into places of terror and violence. Whereas despite these attacks, the LGBTQI+ community remains resilient. LGBTQI+ Americans are defiantly and unapologetically proud. Whereas today and every day, we stand with every LGBTQI+ person in the ongoing struggle against intolerance, discrimination, and injustice. And we remain steadfast in our commitment to help the LGBTQI+ people live free from violence. Whereas this month, we honor the resilience of LGBTQI+ people who are fighting to live authentically and freely. We reaffirm our belief that LGBTQI+ rights are human rights. Now, therefore, the City Council of Manitou Springs does proclaim June 2023 as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex Pride Month, adopted this 20th day of June 2023 in the city of Manitou Springs, El Paso County, Colorado.
Thank you, Natalie. Did you have any comments on that, or?
I did not. I just thought it was important this year to make sure that we acknowledge Pride Month.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I guess I'd offer other counselors an opportunity you might like to make comments this time. Okay, hearing none, let's push on. Next item, we have Representative Mark Snyder here to meet with City Council. Mark wanted to give us a rundown of the, I think, the legislative review. And Mark, you look pretty rested for a guy who went through the meat grinder in the first part of the year.
Thank you, Mayor. It has been a little time to recharge your battery since Sine Die, I believe, May 9th. And thank you, Mayor Graham and councilors, for this opportunity to come before you and maybe give you a wrap up of kind of a crazy 2023 legislative session. And then if you had any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those. So I think this was definitely the most challenging of my 5 legislative sessions that I've been up doing this job up in Denver. You know, the election last year in 2022, most people predicted a more balanced legislature as far as party affiliation, and it was anything but. In fact, it went the opposite direction. We had 41 Democrats in the House, and we came out of the election with 46, which is a supermajority in the House of Representatives. The Senate also increased the Democrats in the chamber, not to a supermajority, but pretty close. And that made for a much different session this year. We had a lot of new people. I think there were 16 new members of the House coming in, all with a lot of energy and a lot of ideas on what's going to be best for people of Colorado. And it led to a lot of interesting outcomes, I guess. And probably what got the most attention up at the legislature this year were the bills that didn't make it through. Either they died in one chamber or the other, or the governor vetoed them. And so I'm talking about the just cause eviction, certainly the governor's big land use bill, Senate Bill 213, which I believe Mayor Graham, you were very clear where you stood on that bill. And it was a real sea change for Colorado, trying to make DOLA kind of the land use czar of Colorado and taking away what has always been left up to local jurisdictions to decide how they wanted to use the lands that's in their jurisdiction. So, we hear a lot about that, but at the same time, it was actually a very productive session. We passed a lot of good legislation. I think that will really help people. Specifically, I think about increasing the earned income tax credit, the increase in the child tax credit. Those are ways that you can really get money back into the pockets of people who most can use that. And so we did those in dovetail. The child tax credit went away at the federal level. So we were able to increase, I believe, 10% and then 20% in future years, the amount of that credit that people will be allowed to take. We had a lot of bills in an area that I've been working in all my time in wildfire mitigation and strategies. I was actually on 3 bills in the wildfire space. One creates a resilient homes grant fund. So that's for new builds or rebuilds, which unfortunately we have our share of rebuilds after the Marshall Fire and others. It also creates a fund for retrofitting existing homes. And so that's just getting stood up. We're hoping for a large infusion of federal dollars. We're promised that's coming any time now. So that will be going rolling that out as quickly as we can. Also had a workforce bill where we recognize the average age of somebody who works in the forestry or fire mitigation. They're getting up there in years. And so we've created a program that will recruit younger people into the Forest Service, into wildfire mitigation. And the last bill on wildfires that I was involved in was evacuation clearance times and modeling. Became a very contentious issue down in our neighbors to the east over here. But I think what I learned through that process is there's could be some real value to having a public facing study and the evacuation times and modeling out there. It's really more of a pre-evacuation tool. So folks, they see there's fire, they get that pre-evacuation notice. That's the time I would want people looking, okay, what's our best way to get out? Where are we going to go? Have a plan. And, and as we all remember from now 11 years ago, the Waldo Canyon fire, these things don't really have a time schedule and don't come at convenient times. And my biggest fear is that we would get back in that type of a drought situation, high fire danger, and have an evacuation trying to occur at 2 o'clock on a July afternoon when Manitou is full and Cheyenne Canyon down the road is full also. So we're continuing to explore that. I will be serving on the Wildfire Interim Committee again this summer. So this year I was made chair of the House Finance Committee. I'd always been on the Business Affairs and Labor, and I'm still not sure why, but I volunteered to go onto the Judiciary Committee, which is a very long committee meetings, a lot of tough decisions that you have to deal with on bills that come before that committee. I was also named a Uniform Law Commissioner for the next 2 years. So what we basically do is meet and look at all the revisions to the UCC commercial code and very in the weeds legal technical stuff. But As those were kind of my personal changes for this session. And then we had a lot of bills in the housing area. As usual, we had a lot of environmentally conscious bills, really trying to get energy companies and emitters to take it even more seriously. And to me, it's really amazing how fast this transformation has occurred. Because when I first started, electric vehicles made up 2.5% of new car sales. They've topped 12% now. And so things are really happening. I met recently with some of the CSU folks, and they've really advanced the retirement of the Drake power plant. We're really investing a lot into alternative clean energy sources. We're really at the cusp of a major transition. And so a lot of the bills we saw that want to go to hydrogen now, well, we're not there yet. And they want, the commercial truckers and others to just abandon the diesel engine and go right to electric, but there's issues there also. So really this year, I found myself kind of in the middle on a lot of bills. I worked with a lot of my enthusiastic, more progressive, for lack of a better term, colleagues, and using the experience I've had in then 4 years, now 5 years in the legislature to really help them to see how they can get a bill with great aspirational ideas, but the real nuts and bolts is in how it's going to be implemented. What are the unintended consequences? So I spent a lot of time working on those types of bills with some of my colleagues. Overall, I would say the result was a good session. I know there's folks that are unhappy with certain votes that were taken. I told on judiciary, as I said, one area that was really big this year was gun violence prevention. So we passed 5 historic bills that really, I think, have a chance to decrease some of the awful, insidious gun violence that we experience practically on a daily basis. So expanding the use of the red flag law, creating a 21 age limit for the purchase of firearm with a few exceptions. Those are the kind of bills that I think can really make a difference. If somebody's in crisis, having to wait those extra 3 days, we had a bill that requires if you buy a gun, you can't get it for 3 days. And, for people, and especially in suicide situations, that could really make a difference for people. So we, like I said, the ghost gun bill is another one we passed, allowing people, preventing people from not having to register these homemade, with a 3D printer guns and things like that. The one vote that I've probably taken the most heat for a lot of folks was House Bill 1230, the assault weapons ban, which ultimately in the Judiciary Committee, after 15 hours of testimony and over 500 witnesses, there were 4 Democrats that voted against that bill. And I don't want anybody to think it's because we want assault weapons, which is absolutely not what the case was. But, looking at it from a constitutional legal perspective, reading all the Supreme Court decisions, talking to a lot of experts in that area, it was pretty much universally decided up there that it wasn't the right bill for the right year. And we didn't want to really jeopardize the agenda we had with the other 5 good gun bills, which have all been signed into law. So that one is, I've sent out an explanation to folks that have queried me about it. But it's painful, to be honest with you, because they don't want to hear about constitutionality or legal nuances or implementation problems. They just want those weapons out of their lives, out of their schools. We had, twice thousands of high school students to come down to the Capitol and really voice their concern. You got to realize these kids have been in active shooter drills their entire scholastic career. It's just one of those situations that we didn't get here overnight, and I don't think we're going to get out of it overnight, but we can't give up. We can't stop fighting for it. So I know I'm just kind of rambling here at this point. I'd be happy to talk about any specific legislation or areas of concern, but I just wanted you all to know that I'm doing my best to represent us up at the Capitol. And so far, I think it's gone pretty well. In this session in particular, A lot of stuff passed you may not have heard about because there's so much attention paid to the bills that didn't make it to the finish line.
Great. Thank you, Representative. Guess I'd like to open up to council for any questions or comments you have for Representative Snyder. Judith and then Nancy.
Representative Snyder, thank you so much for joining us. I was really impressed with what a supermajority can get done. For those of you in the audience who are listening in, if you get a chance to look in the packet, Representative Snyder gave us an overview of over 140 House and Senate bills and also mentioned 11 GOP bills that were defeated. And I just say overall, I'm so impressed. And I think that the bills that got passed really, in my personal opinion, really reflect the what we want Colorado to be as a state and stand for. A few things that I had a little bit of disappointment about, certainly the assault ban. I guess I would ask you to ask your constituents and those you serve with, when is going to be the right time that we're going to address this? You know, over the this past weekend, we had over 100 shootings just this past weekend nationwide. I don't know how many deaths occurred. There were deaths that happened, and it's just it's too much. But that said, the only other bill that I really had some frustration over was House Bill 23-1255. And I felt that was the one that prohibits growth caps. And so it prevents local governments from enacting and enforcing growth caps that limit development. And my thoughts around that, I felt like, along with Senate Bill 213, I felt like it was a little bit of overreach from a government perspective on local communities. You also passed Senate Bill 23-295. I believe it was the task force, the Colorado River Drought Task Force. And I sit in my office and I think, okay, we have a drought task force, but we are telling communities that they can't decide whether they're going to limit development. In some communities, I believe Fountain is one of them, are looking at, limiting, water taps because we just don't have the water. And so I think there has to be this balance of a discussion between what resources we have and what we're trying to do. I know the bill addresses water in a very vague way, but I don't know if you can speak to that bill at all, and is it just trying to promote more affordable housing or housing in general, or can you just make me feel a little better about it?
The growth caps in particular.
Yeah.
So my recollection of there were only two cities that actually had enacted growth caps, Boulder and
Lakewood.
Lakewood, maybe it was also. I can tell you why the governor was so frowned upon that bill, because he feels that it's an artificial cap. And so if you limit, and I think they both had 1% growth cap, so they could only expand their housing stock footprint 1% per year. Well, what that does is it drives people that maybe are gainfully employed, say in Boulder, to just move out to outlying communities. So that accomplishment that Boulder might be feeling for a 1% growth cap is felt by their neighboring jurisdictions. And as people move far enough away to where they can afford, because growth caps do drive up the cost of housing. It's just a supply and demand issue. So then you've got people moving 25 miles away from their place of employment, maybe from where their kids really want to go to school. And that just adds to the more congestion, more pollution, and more secondary effects of that. So that was a bill that came from, actually it was Broomfield was the other one. So it's a new legislator, William Lindstedt from Broomfield, was a city councilor and the county commissioner at the same time, because it is the city and county of Broomfield. And he apparently has been on that mission for several years in his local government service. But I think there's an economic argument to be made saying that growth caps don't accomplish what people think they will. They might in your jurisdiction, but the overall picture, it really contributes to the problem of the lack of affordable housing. So I think that would be the.
Thank you for that. I was just wondering if these two communities were really voicing environmental concerns about their, with their caps that they wanted.
I
Was
think-
water, Linstat is one of the authors of the bill along with Dixon and Gonzalez. And I was just wondering if environmental issues were part of that desire to cap development in those areas.
I don't know that history, why those were passed or exactly when they were passed. I'm sure that was a consideration because that Boulder for sure is a very environmentally conscious, forward-thinking community. But I think that's the problem is that once you get outside the Boulder city limits, you're visiting those problems onto neighboring communities. And it really doesn't matter whether a truck or a car is emitting in Boulder or Lakewood or Aurora, it all contributes to the Front Range non-attainment that the northern Colorado is in. And that we down here, I think, are just barely hanging below being in attainment. But you look at how fast we're growing with all the new growth and our traffic is not quite equaling Denver's, but it's getting there. I think it's only a matter of time until we're in non-attainment. We'll have to look at other strategies. As far as 213 and fitting in with that, I think there's some good stuff in that bill. There really was stuff I really would like to support. I'm a local control guy. It's in Colorado. It's baked into our constitution. We have home rule cities. We have home rule counties. We've always left land use up to the local jurisdictions. But even when Colorado Springs, not always considered the most progressive government in the state of Colorado, when they tried to put in some of these same measures where they would increase density, allow for ADUs, mother-in-law cottages and other strategies, more density into existing neighborhoods. Well, of course, they got a lot of pushback from the old NIMBY argument. It's a great idea for over there, but not here in my neighborhood. And so I actually think 213, it didn't come back to the House for a final vote. But I think there's a lot of folks that have been frustrated at the local level would have appreciated having that kind of mandated down upon them so they could say to those NIMBYs in those neighborhoods, hey, it's not us, it's the state is forcing this on us. I think the problem there was really process. Apparently, the governor's office now says, oh, it was well stakeholdered, but as a legislator and most other legislators, we didn't know about that bill until a month before the end of session. Not as bad as the property tax bill, which came a week before the end of session. So I think this year, I'm not sure why, but the governor's office, who has always been really out front and they would weigh in early on important bills where they had a concern or wanted some things put into it or whatever, they were not as active this year. I don't know if it's re-election hangover for the governor or something, but I would say they did not live up to the high bar they had set in the first 4 sessions that I served in.
Thank you for that. And also for your work on the 2 House bills and the Senate bill, co-authoring those on wildfire. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Nancy? Oh, and you're going to pass. Anybody else? Okay. Mark, I have a question. I guess one would be a good time to have you back, before we go into the next legislative agenda, so you can kind of tell us what's on your mind and we could maybe share some of our thoughts so that, maybe we don't. This was, I thought, this is the first time I paid as much attention as I did to the state legislature. And that was chiefly through the perspective of Pikes-Peak Area Council of Governments. And monitoring that was a bit of an education. So just to be a little bit more informed next time, what would you recommend?
I would think maybe the first week in December or, right after Thanksgiving, something around right in there. We get a little too close to the holidays. It's hard to get anything together, but things are forming now. I'm hearing what other bills are people working on. I'm working on a couple of bills myself on home equity theft and the foreclosure process. I'm working on a bill for firefighters right now, dealing with some privacy issues for them when they are party to a case. Got some other ideas that I get from a lot of constituents, but I think long about that time, I'll have a better sense of what the upcoming session is going to bring and be able to give you the latest information.
Okay, thank you. We'll maybe try to pencil in a placeholder or a little before, a little after Thanksgiving, something like that.
Yeah, somewhere in that, at that time, I think just about perfect.
Okay, and council can bring their questions and petitions.
Sure.
So, okay, we appreciate the work that you've done. It's a lot more difficult than I'd imagined, having a little bit of a glance into the State House. It was interesting.
Well, and I think I'm pretty easy to reach. I put my cell number on everything, but if any of you ever have a question about a particular bill or just want to talk through something, don't hesitate. I love getting those types of calls. I'm not so good at getting right back to you with an email. I always respond, but not right away, but don't hesitate to call me if something's on your mind.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council.
Mhm. Okay. Council, and I'll ask Hannah, I believe we now have the applicants here for the 183 Crystal Park Road. So we're good. So we could go ahead with that. We do have that. So for the rest of the audience, I would mention that when we adopted the agenda tonight or approved the agenda, we did modify it so that we could move on on item H1 and I1 as those individuals were here. So we'll jump at this point to H1. That's a public hearing for a final major plat, 2301 Cheyenne Village, filing number 2, 183 Crystal Park Road, Manitou Cabins LLC owner. And we will first hear from our city planning department, then the applicant will have the opportunity to speak. We will then have an opportunity for public comment. Following that, the applicant will be able to speak again to respond to any comments or questions. And then we'll sum it up with planning. Our planning department again, and council will then go into deliberation. Hannah, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Graham and members of City Council. Tonight, we are reviewing the major final plat for the Manitou Cabins. This is the second phase of land entitlements, beginning with the major development plan that you heard in October of last year. If we could move to the next slide, that would be great. Just as a quick reminder, we received approval of a major development plan in October of last year from the City Council. That gave permission for the applicants to begin work on the west side of the parcel, which would be the historic cabins. With that approval, they also received approval to demolish 3 structures from HPC and from the City Council. And if you've driven by recently, you've probably seen some of that work happening on site. Next slide. The property is about 9 acres in size. It's zoned low density residential. What we're reviewing today is a major final plat that establishes lots for each of the historic cabins, subdivides the east side of the property into 8 single family lots, dedicates an 11,686 square foot pocket park, which was confirmed by PARAB on June 5th or 6th, whichever that Monday was. And it also creates a drainage easement along Sutherland Creek. With the major final plat, a Tier 3 Geologic Hazard Report was submitted, and it was reviewed by Colorado Geologic Survey. Next slide. I just wanted to remind the City Council what the previous site plan looked like. The updated site plan looks very similar. But what we see on the old site plan are those back out parking spaces. There is a cul-de-sac on the Mountain View extension, and there is 9 lots. If we could go to the next slide, this is the updated site plan. So those back out parking spaces have been removed. A sidewalk has been added along the length of Crystal Park Road. The lots to the east of Sutherland Creek, I guess southeast, were reduced from 9 to 8. And the extension of Mountain View Road was redesigned from a public right-of-way to a private right-of-way or private road. And instead of a cul-de-sac, it has changed to a hammerhead. And that has been reviewed and approved by the fire department that works for their turnaround radius. The reason that this design change happened was so they could pull the proposed structures from on the east side off of the hillside to area that is flatter. Next slide. This is a look at the actual plat document. So the plat's very technical. It just shows where those lots are going to be, the easements, and the tracks that are to be dedicated, or the easements, the park, and the tracks for common use, maintenance, and access. Next slide. I just wanted to touch on the lot sizes real quick. This did come up at the City Planning Commission meeting. I should say the City Planning Commission heard this item last Wednesday, and it did receive unanimous approval. But the lot sizes specifically, if we were to, or if we're just looking at the historic cabin side, the plat is acting similar to a condo plat. So those individual lots are smaller than what the zone district allows for. However, when we take the total amount of land area that's dedicated for the cabins portion, and if we were to do like a typical lot, those lots would be oversized. So instead of having leaving maintenance of those common access tracts up to individual property owners, the applicant, and I'm in agreement, a shared common use tract makes more sense. So that's why it looks a little bit different on the east side of Sutherland Creek. It works very similar to like a townhome plat. It is staff's opinion that this is compliant with the intent of the zoning code for the reasons I stated, and specifically the subdivision ordinance does have a section that says the usability of the lot is a governing factor. Next slide. I wanted to hop over to the Geologic Hazard Report. The Tier 3 Geologic Hazard Report was submitted and reviewed by CGS. That report did have a proposed geologic setback, which actually aligned with our no build line. And overall, the Geohazard Report in CGS was in agreement that the site is developable, the east side where those lots are. However, they did have specific recommendations for certain lots. And they did also recommend that site-specific geologic hazard reports be submitted once a building permit or a design for a particular home was ready for a building permit. So those requirements have been added to the plat. CGS is in agreement with the conclusions of the Geohazard Report. They did have some questions about the floodplain, which I'm sure you saw in the staff report. However, that those items wouldn't affect the plat application. So we're working through those as a separate process. It was also asked how we enforce recommendations on geohazard reports or that are within geologic hazard reports. In this particular case, because this was kind of an umbrella report for several lots, we ended up putting the recommendations as notes on the plat. However, when we get to the point of site-specific geologic hazard reports, we enforce those through a couple of different mechanisms or a couple of different avenues. First, staff is through the minor site plan, which is a new application in our new zoning code. We're able to review site plans before they get to a building permit. So with the minor site plan, we would be requiring the site-specific geologic hazard report. From there, we would refer that geohazard report to CGS to get any recommendations or points of concern or something like that, work through that with the applicant, and then we would, in an ideal world, approve it, and they would go to their building permit. From there, we would review the building permit to ensure that the design incorporates the agreed upon conditions in the minor site plan. From there, if the building permit showed those items accurately, the regional building department inspectors would ensure that it was built according to spec. So we, as the planning department, are the first line of defense. So we would be reviewing those geohazard reports and making sure that the plans reflected those recommendations. And then on the ground, regional building is the one who would inspect to make sure it was built correctly. Next slide. Just a quick reminder about public engagement. There were a number of neighborhood meetings that happened with the major development plan. We did hold another neighborhood meeting on May 4th. Approximately 30 were in attendance. Generally speaking, once the residents saw that we were pulling buildings off of the hillside and that a no build line was added, a lot of concerns kind of went away, and that was reflected in the Planning Commission public comment. Next slide. Typically, major final plats, or I should say, major final plats would be under the review authority of staff with the new code. However, because this process, what started under the old code, it kind of relied on a two-step process. So as one of the conditions that was given by the city council, the major final plat went back to City Planning Commission and to city council for review. That was typical under the old code. So the new review criteria for plats are very cut and dry. One, does it comply with the requirements of the LUDC? And two, does it comply with the applicable technical standards of the LUDC? In our opinion, yes, it does. Next slide. So
Hannah, just for the benefit of the audience, could you just explain what LUDC
Oh, yeah.
means, please?
Of course. So LUDC is short for the Land Use and Development Code. The Land Use and Development Code was adopted by the City Council in January of this year and became effective March 1st. It's staff recommendation. Staff recommends approval of the major final plat with a number of technical modifications. I will say that I did get a revised final plat yesterday, and it does resolve a number of these. So because that was after the publishing of the report, I just wanted to keep things consistent. But currently the version that is being re-reviewed just at first glance does resolve a lot of these technical elements. And City Planning Commission also unanimously recommended approval. And with that, I'm here with any questions. The applicant doesn't have a presentation, but they are also available for questions.
Thank you. Council, let's go ahead and entertain questions for planning or for the applicant, and then we'll have a public hearing. We'll come back again, so you don't have to ask all your questions right now. But Judith, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Hannah, I was just not close enough. Sorry about that. Regarding the Geologic Survey, section 8.1, unstable or potentially unstable slopes, I think it's page 12 of 39. It mentions specifically cabins 5 and 6. And the language in those two paragraphs talk about if they were to be demolished or if they're not going to be demolished. I guess my first question is, I'm assuming they are not going to be demolished, and specifically cabin 6 had some issues with, hang on, let me get there. If it were to be demolished and something else rebuilt on there, if the existing cabin on lot 6 were to be demolished, the proposed new structure should be sized and sited on the lot such that the new excavation doesn't encroach within 10 feet of the existing cuts for slab on grade. Were those a couple of things that were resolved with the revised plat that you just received? I was a little confused about that language. If you could explain that further to me on those two cabins.
Sure. And so, yes, if I recall correctly, and I would be happy to just take a quick read through and then double check. But if I recall correctly, this was added as a condition on the, or as a note on the final plat. So it wasn't expressly resolved in the version that you saw, or the note was added, but let me just double check exactly what this is looking for and make sure that note fix that.
Any other council questions at this time? If not, I think we go ahead and move to the public comment portion of this. Again, this is a public hearing. This is an opportunity now for anyone in the public to make comments on this topic. So we'll open the public comment portion. If there's anyone who wants to speak to this, you have 3 minutes. We'd ask you to come up and speak into the microphone. Any takers? Okay, I know last time when we had this, we had a number of residents in the area. So I'd like to make sure if they would like to talk to this, if they have the opportunity to do so. Okay, hearing none, I will close the public comment portion. At this point, we would normally bring the applicant back and then the planning, our planner back. Let's see if we have questions here. Council, do we need to, we have more questions or comments? Daniel, I've already closed the public comment section, okay? Session. I'll reopen the public comment section. Okay, come on up, Daniel.
I apologize, Council. I'm just asking a question on behalf of Parab and OSAC, just to perhaps, I didn't want to speak out of turn because I don't know how the process works in terms of the fees in lieu of land and land dedication. If perhaps that subject doesn't have to do with this final plat approval. So that's why I was hesitant to ask or to speak up.
Okay, give you hold still through just a minute, Daniel. Hannah, did you hear that? Did you have an opportunity to understand what Daniel was making comments? I didn't know if you could hear back where you're at. Okay. Okay. Okay, Daniel, I think sounds like she heard that. So when she comes back up, perhaps she can respond to that. Okay, all right. Thanks, Daniel. Okay, any other takers for public comment? Okay, public comments closed. And if you'll take the chair again. And I guess maybe if you're prepared to address Daniel's comments, that would help us.
Yes, for the record, Hannah Van Nimwagen with the Planning Department. I just wanted to take a quick second to read that paragraph that you were referencing, Counselor Chandler. So to answer your specific question first, that is addressed as that particular plat comment that was added. I just wanted to make sure that that note was sufficient, and it is. So that should be good to go. Regarding fees in lieu, that would be addressed once the plat Mylar is ready to be recorded, and that's when we would collect those fees. So those are being calculated and would be done administratively, I guess. So yes, we are familiar.
Okay, thank you. Nancy, comment?
Just that the pocket park is also on the plat, that I think that's what Danu is interested in.
Yes, so the land dedication of that just over 11,000 square foot pocket park is shown appropriately, and we would accept that land dedication once the plat is recorded.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Do we have other comments or questions from council? Questions for Hannah? Okay. All right. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, council, now we're into the deliberation phase. This was a topic that was approved unanimously by the Planning Commission. We need to act on it tonight so we can discuss it, or we could entertain a motion. Nancy?
Yeah, I just was very pleased with the changes that were made and the response on the geotech report. So thank you for that. So I'll make a motion that we approve the major final plat with the following alterations, even though some of them have already been done, but in accordance, since we don't have that, we'll just leave those final alterations in as identified in our packet.
I
1 through
second
6.
it.
And that, Michelle, that was a second? Okay, great. Okay, council, any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion. We have a second. Let's go ahead and vote.
I approve. I vote yes, thanks.
7-0 in favor.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, good job, everybody. Oh, Nancy, yes, please.
Yeah, just to the developer, I think it looks so much better over there. And that you're pursuing this project, I just find so exciting. So thanks for your involvement and all the work you're doing. I know it's not easy.
I guess I'd also mention the council packet. There were a number of public comments or comments from the public emails and so forth that have been received. And I guess I believe those questions were resolved, that the planning department was able to get answers. So in not seeing or hearing from the neighbors, I would take it that they're on board with this as well. So, right, we'll push forward. Right, okay, the next item, and again, this is our somewhat modified schedule. We have approval of Eli Blackshear as a regular member of the Manitou Arts, Culture, and Heritage Board, and Mr. Blackshear has joined us, so. Eli, if you'd come forward, we have Ralph. And gentlemen, if you'd introduce yourselves and give us your addresses.
Eli Blackshear, 17 Ute Trail. Ralph Roughton, 114 Palisade Circle, and Chair of the Match Board.
Great. Council, Eli has applied to be a member of the match board. I guess, Ralph, it would be appropriate if you'd like to speak to this, and then we'd like to have Eli have the opportunity to speak. Okay. Yeah, you need to be about 3 inches from the microphone.
Okay. We on the match board ran one short of a full 7-member board for pretty much the entire last 12 months for various reasons. But as we now catch our breath from the past campaign and process of recommending the grants, which now are being dispersed, we're made it a high priority to try to fill our vacancy for a regular member on the board, and also to look for someone with a different kind of experience. Eli Blackshear brings us not only someone who has grown up here, but he also has been involved with community issues. And he also is heavily involved, as many of you know, in the music community, which has been very underrepresented on the match board, but also has been the subject of quite a few grant requests. So just everything made a lot of sense. Jason Wells, who's been an alternate member of the board pretty much through this whole thing, kind of played matchmaker on a good bit of this, but we've had Eli and I have met. Eli's been to a planning meeting that we had a few weeks ago, looking ahead to the next 12 months. And we're excited at the possibility of having him on our board.
Great, thank you. Eli?
Yeah, so I through Jason Wells, who's the alternate member currently over the past about a year or so, right? Three years, yes, a year. I had been speaking about involvement that I wanted to get in a lot more around community-based projects and events concerning the city. And I know I've spoken and met with you guys about a few things in the past. So I'm very excited at the prospect of looking at being approved for the board. Living here my whole life, I have always very much grown up with an appreciation and a deep love for our creative community here in Manitou Springs, and just any way that I get to be a part of helping people see our little slice of heaven in some of its more beautiful and favorable ways. I would love to be as useful for as possible. So
Great, thank you. And I think the council packet was pretty complete. We had all the customary things, the letter of approval and whatnot, endorsement letter. So I guess I'll open it up to council. Council, do you have any questions for Eli or comments? I think silence is kind of a sign of approval tonight. In that case, I would entertain a motion to approve Eli Blackshear as a regular member of the match advisory board.
I move approval of Eli Blackshear as a regular member of the Manitou Arts, Culture, and Heritage Board.
We have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Fortune. Okay, any further deliberation? Let's vote.
I vote in favor. Thanks, Judy.
And that's a 7-0 vote in favor.
Good, it's a unanimous vote, and Mayor Pro Tem has a comment.
First of all, I want to say, Eli, welcome. I think you're a great addition to the match board. Ralph, I do have a comment for you, though, as chair, in that it seems like we're losing some of the people who are strategy, administration, policy expertise on the board, and perhaps non-artist perspective. So I would just ask that you recruit with potentially that in mind. And I don't know, you as a chair know your board the best, but I know that the strength of the board, since I was the liaison to it for the first couple of years, was that it was a really good mixture of artists and non-artists. And I found that to be very helpful and very productive. So I would just suggest that that's something to look at. Thanks.
And I'd just like to say on behalf of council, thanks for the work that you are doing, both of you. And Ralph, if you carry that back to the rest of the match board people, we expect great things. Okay, it's a high bar, so jump high. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see, that gets us back to the published order of the agenda. So that brings us to item G3, Urban Renewal Authority discussion. And this is kind of it's a follow-on from a meeting we had several weeks ago. We had some outstanding questions on actually kind of the role of the URA and a number of the legal intricacies and financial intricacies that define so much of what the URA does and can do. So first we'll hear from our finance director, Becca Davis, then we'll hear from our attorney, and Councilman Shade has also asked to make comments. So I would also mention that originally we'd hoped to do this at a work session, but it's fundamental that we have our attorney here, and that's typically, it's hard to arrange except at a regular meeting. So Becca, you've got the floor.
Good evening. I have a PowerPoint to present. Yay, that's it. Okay, so I'm Becca Davis, the Finance Director for the City of Manitou Springs. Next slide, please. So the URA, or Urban Renewal Authority, was adopted by resolution on December 5th in 2006. And it's to exist for a period of not to exceed 25 years. And the funding is provided by two separate taxes, and they're called TIFs, which stands for Tax Incremental Financing or Tax Increment Financing. Anyway, one is a property tax, and it's very standard. It's set up and administered by El Paso County, and it is the entire 77.181 mil over the base amount from 2006 goes to the board. And then the other is a more unusual. It's a sales tax TIF, and it's for the amount over what was collected in that area in 2006, which was around $96,000 at the time. So it's considerably more than that now. But it's a special provision in the plan. And the plan says that City Council decides how much is going to be given. Oh, next slide, please. Sorry about that. Got ahead of myself. Okay, so it says that it's City Council's decision when the URA submits to them a financing plan outlining the proposed amounts and how that sales tax TIF is going to be used. So it doesn't necessarily have to be given to the URA. It's decided on a yearly basis. And for 2023, City Council decided not to give any allocation of the TIF. And if they had, the estimate for that amount would have probably been around $1,625,000. Next slide. Oh, thank you. Okay, so this slide shows all the taxing entities in the URA. There's quite a few. When you add it all up, it comes out to 77.181 mils. And of those 77.181 mils, the City of Manitou Springs is 12.988. Now, for the year 2023, per El Paso County, that totals $130,835. And of that, the city's portion that is going to the URA is $22,016, $17 when you round up. Next slide, please. So what brings me here tonight is to present to City Council options for what can happen with the URA. And that is not necessarily a decision to make tonight, it's just presenting your options. And one is just to leave the URA as it is. The second option is to create a memorandum of understanding or MOU with the URA board. And the third one is to dissolve the URA. So the next few slides I've got here are going to show pros and cons of each of these options. So option one is to leave the URA as it is. So the pro is that there's an additional, when you look at this year's property tax, so I'm using 2023 as an example. When you look at this year's property tax, the city has an additional $108,818 being spent on that area by the URA board. And as you remember, this is that 77.181 mil, which is over the city's 12.988 mils, is an additional 64.193 mils that wouldn't otherwise be spent on that area if the URA did not exist. And once again, council can determine how much sales tax to allocate, if any. So that is a decision for the council to make, and there's no additional cost. The cons is there's a lack of control by city council over the development in the URA area in terms of how the property taxes are being spent, which they are still receiving. So next slide, please. So then the next option is to create a memorandum of understanding with the URA where you establish exactly what decision points the board, the council wants to be involved with the board, and how things will proceed in the future. Now, the pros of that are the same as leaving the board as is. There would be that additional 108,818 being spent on that area. Council still decides how much sales tax they want to allocate, if any. And there's an additional pro, and that would be the council can now have a say or have control over the developments in the URA, which would be determined by the language in the MOU. Now, cons are none at this point. Next slide, please. So, and then the third is to dissolve the URA. Now, still using 2023 as an example, this would mean that the city would gain an extra $22,017, as remember from that example I had up earlier, to be spent anywhere in the city instead of just in the URA area. Now, per the spreadsheet in the packet that I've inserted, it's page 112. I have forecasted that the amount generated by the 12.988 mil levy of the city for the remaining 8 years, well, for the entire 8.5 years, would be $355,737. So that would all, instead of being kept just for the URA area, would be now the city would have directly in its coffers to spend as council decides. But there are a couple of cons. One is the city loses that extra property tax that's currently being generated by those extra mills to be spent on that area in the URA. It would now all go to the different taxing authorities. And two, there's a state law that says the city could be required to fund the existing obligations of the ERA. And there is currently an obligation of the ERA. And I have a spreadsheet in the packet about that property. And that spreadsheet's on page 111. And it illustrates the possible property tax mill levy that the city would have to pay, because the obligation is not just the 12.988 of the city's own mill. The obligation would be for the entire mill levy of 77.181. And it appears to be a pretty substantial amount, and it's quite a bit over what the city would gain in terms of property tax. So next slide, please. So there's been a question, could the ERA be expanded or replaced? And of course, the short answer is yes, but there are a couple of issues. And one is the cost, because either to expand it or, well, no, wait a minute, to expand it, I don't think you have to, but for replacing it, you would definitely have to do a blight study. And back in 2006, the cost of the blight study that established this URA was $74,500. So in today's dollars, that would be $112,100, just, calculating with inflation.
I'll just, it's for expansion or for replacement.
It is for
Yep.
both. All of a sudden I started questioning myself. Okay, thank you for that. So, and then the other issue is there have been new laws that have come into place since the URA was formed. And these laws would actually further limit city council's current control due to new requirements of adding board members from all the taxing entities that are involved. So, we're talking about the county, school districts, and special districts. So, and that's what led to my conclusion here. Next slide, please. Which is that it appears to me that the best action would be for city council to direct staff to create a memorandum of understanding with the current URA. And that concludes my presentation, and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Becca. And before you leave, councilors, do you have questions for Becca? Okay, thank you, Becca. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We also had a number of questions that were referred to our attorney. Jeff, I think council had the opportunity to look at your memorandum, some of it being confidential. So I guess I'm looking at you. Would you want to provide us with a little overview, or would you rather respond to questions, or do you have other advice?
Well, yeah, I had anticipated on just responding to any questions or making clarifications if anybody had any sort of confusion, but because basically, I really like my legal advice to be confidential to my clients, unless, city council decides they want to actually waive my confidential legal advice. So, I mean, my position right now is that my legal advice in response to specific questions is attorney-client privilege. But I could just give a quick overview of what I think sort of the main issues are that we're dealing with. If that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think it would. And I guess what you're alluding to is that I could see an executive session as a possibility as a consequence of this. But if you could give us the salient points that would help inform us, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we're dealing with a statute that talks about how a URA is basically abolished. That's the term the statute uses. And it's a real short provision. It's 3125.115, and it's subsection 2. And basically what it just says is the city council can abolish the URA via ordinance at any time, as long as it makes adequate arrangements to satisfy the URA's outstanding debt and obligations. And the ordinance, once the ordinance is passed, the actual date of abolishment can be no sooner than 6 months after the effective date of the ordinance. So that's the statutory framework we're dealing with. And so, I think the real question, at least one of the questions that I see some of the concerns are for the city is, well, what exactly are the pros and cons? What are the financial pros and cons of abolishing the URA? I can't address your particular other concerns, but really briefly, the way I look at this is that If you abolish the URA, you basically lose the remaining incremental revenue that you would get from the other taxing entities' mill levy. So there's a base value from when the TIF provision went into effect for all the property in the URA district, and the URA boundaries. Any increases in that value are basically subject to the mill levies of all the taxing entities, including the city. And that revenue, instead of going to the taxing entities, goes to the URA to fund URA activities. And so if you abolish the URA, you basically will get back your city property tax incremental revenue, but you will lose all the other taxing entities' incremental revenues. That's kind of the trade-off you're making just directly. And so what follows from that is if you abolish the URA, you basically have to look and say, how do we basically satisfy their outstanding debts and obligations? And the way you do that is by any remaining funds the URA has in its assets, I assume. And if that's not sufficient, some other source of revenue. Doesn't specify what it is, it has to be some other source of revenue. And that would basically, the only source I can think of would be city funds. And so you're really looking at the trade-offs between what you have to cover given the remaining URA assets at the time of abolishment and what you're losing in the way of other third-party revenue that's available for use that would be available if the URA was still in existence. And there are some savings, I understand, there'll be probably some administrative savings that the URA won't be incurring. And on the flip side, the city might have to incur some of those itself to administer certain things. Maybe it'd be less, maybe it'd be more, I don't know. But basically, I think the heart of the financial analysis is the trade-off between losing the TIF revenue from the third-party taxing entities, what the city would get for itself, and then what are the remaining assets of the URA to satisfy the outstanding obligations. That's really how I wanted to frame it, but I'm sure there's different opinions out there. So
Great, thank you. And I believe Mr. Shade has a question for you.
So Jeff, specifically, since there's only one TIF agreement in place, okay, which is with the Holiday Inn, okay. When you spoke about how there's that differential between the two, okay. So let's just say in sort of kind of round numbers, let's just say that the city portion of the mill is 10%, okay, just for, illustration purposes.
the overall mill levy.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
right. So if the Holiday Inn was paying $100 a year in taxes, okay, right, from their mill, right, and our portion is 10%, that's $10, right?
Right.
Okay. So because they have a TIF agreement, okay, between the URA and the Holiday Inn, and upon dissolving the URA, if that was to happen, okay, the city would, as I understand under state code, inherit that liability. Is that correct?
That's generally correct.
Okay, so we would owe back to the Holiday Inn the full $100.
That's right.
Okay, so the difference between before, okay, because now we're in a sense taking on the full liabilities of the URA, okay, we're having to come up with $90 as essentially kind of a premium, all right?
That's correct. And I just want to be clear that we're talking about the property tax increment.
Exactly, exactly, okay.
Yeah.
So, but that only because that's the only agreement that I know of in place for the Holiday Inn, okay? That doesn't apply to any of the other taxing, any of the other schedule numbers within the 64 acres, correct? Except that one party.
So
in other words, the TIF reimbursement only happens with this one agreement that's in place.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess what I'm questioning is some of the staff analysis that shows that there's this huge gap in the entire district. That's
Excuse me,
what's
John,
confusing me.
John, question. Would you rather just go ahead and present your
No,
thoughts? Or you
No,
wanna-
I need to have this
Okay,
answered.
okay, I just was
Yeah.
wondering. Okay, go ahead.
From a legal standpoint.
Yeah, I can't speak to their calculations. I haven't done a review of their numbers, so.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not prepared to kind of present anything tonight until I kind of have that question answered, given that that sort of kind of has come up.
Oh, okay.
Because
well,
I
the-
think
the-
that's a huge difference. I think the other thing that I guess I'd like to just reflect on real quick is that Becca said that the so-called amount that the base that the city could be asked for by the URA would be 1.6 million. Is that correct?
Yes, it's not the base, that's.
Well,
the-
I mean, that's essentially the difference between the base and what's being generated, right? The difference.
That's what's forecasted for
And
twenty
I
twenty-three.
think that's sort of a rather shocking amount of money. I mean, to me, if we were to make a budget adjustment this year for 1.6 million, what would that look like?
It would severely impact our ending fund balance. I think I currently have it. I would have to double check what those ending numbers are. I don't want to just talk off the top of my head.
But that's a big number, isn't it?
Yes, it's a very big number.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
John, I'm wondering if in light of this, and it's very helpful to have this additional information and this financial and legal advice. Would it make sense? I know you put a lot of work in on an analysis that comes probably to a different conclusion. Would it make sense for you to get with Becca and compare the numbers so we know what
Well,
we're
exactly.
comparing apples
I
to
mean,
apples?
I only had access to this analysis from the staff, starting at 5 PM on Friday. Okay, and then we had a 3-day holiday. And so this is a lot of this stuff, there's no way that I could have had all this stuff answered, today and have, my presentation sharpened up, given some of this information.
Okay, I would love to get with you.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I guess I think what we ought to do is move to postpone this item to a certain time or use the discretion of the mayor to reschedule.
Okay, and Becca, I think your work schedule, you have an audit, but then we've got the budget review coming up here, the mid-year budget review. So I guess maybe if you two could have a brief meeting and get an idea how much time it's going to take. And then Becca, you get your other work done. I don't think this is terribly urgent. So then you two can get together at some reasonable time. Does that sound okay?
That
Okay,
sounds
so
great.
we'll put it there. Okay. All right, Natalie.
I just, it was, there was a counselor who was concerned about a conflict of interest for me as someone who's on the Board of Education. And so I just wanted to discuss that tonight since we have Jeff here and it seems like an okay moment to do that.
Okay, just a minute.
Is that-
Judy, this is a little bit of a tangent. Is it okay if we discuss that? This is about her role. Kind of she wears two hats because she's the school board president.
I can jump in here. I
Thank
mean,
you.
typically when there's an item on the agenda, there may be a conflict of interest issue. It's totally appropriate to have that conversation as part of that agenda item.
Good answer. Okay. You've got the floor, Natalie.
Okay. So I spoke with John Stanek, who's the school attorney, and I spoke with Jeff Parker, obviously who's the city attorney. And we discussed the fact that this is not a quasi judicial discussion, which would sort of immediately put that conflict into place. And so I think from there, it basically came to the conclusion that it was up to me to determine whether or not it was a conflict. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I mean, the way I usually handle individual conflicts is if there's a conflict like that creates maybe a due process issue in a quasi judicial type situation that would affect the city's overall decision, then I can weigh in to a certain degree. I'm happy to provide advice on this, which I did to Natalie as well. But ultimately, the conflict issue is the council member's personal conflict. And I don't represent personal council members personally. So I can provide some guidance, but ultimately I say, it's your decision. If you want legal advice, specific to you, you can hire your own attorney. But generally what I said was that I don't think the URA's abolishment impacts the revenue to the school district because there are certain state backfill provisions and the district has control over another part of its mill levy. So I don't think there's a huge impact on the school district one way or the other. So there's really no financial impact to the district that she represents. And in addition, the URA law was amended in 2015, as Becca mentioned, to actually provide a seat on the URA board for a school district representative. And, you know, that indicates to me that, you know, if a school district representative can be on the URA board making decisions, it indicates that there's a low likelihood of there being a personal conflict if a member of the school district is actually on council making decisions regarding the URA. Now, that's not to say that there weren't issues when that law was passed in 2015 regarding individual taxing entity representatives being on the URA, how that could be a conflict. It was never resolved. There's no cases on it. But ultimately, I think it's a low likelihood of there being a conflict. But I did say to Councilmember Johnson that, you know, she really needs to make the decision herself and talk to her own attorney about that issue. But I don't think it affects the city's liability when making a decision regarding this issue. Long-winded way of saying, I don't have a huge concern, but it's really Councilmember Johnson's decision.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Parker.
Thanks.
And thanks for calling that to our attention, Natalie. So I guess it's on you.
Yep. So at this point, I feel comfortable moving forward. I think it is not black and white. The school might in some way benefit financially from a decision one way or another, but it's complicated, right? I mean, having the Beckers Lane Bridge, improved pedestrian access to the fields and drainage for the fields and things along those lines, Highway 24 interchange is a disaster. So I think that there are many aspects to any decision, and it is not, there's not a black and white moment that I'm aware of that I would be impeded from engaging in this conversation due to my relationship with the school, which I do not benefit from financially, nor do I even have a child in the school.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mayor, may I make a comment?
Yeah, just let's finish. Let Julie hang on. Let me make sure that Natalie's finished.
I just want to say that, like Julie, I do encourage people to continue to bring this up if it does feel like we do enter in those areas that get a little less, I don't know, a little muckier. So,
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Great. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, Julie, Natalie's finished. So you've got the floor, Julie.
Well, thank you so much. And before I make my statement, that last sentence that Natalie said, that you asked me to hold on, came through totally mumbled. Could you tell me essentially what that last comment was?
Sure, Julie. Just that at this moment, I feel comfortable, but I do encourage council to continue to ask questions and question my conflict as we move forward.
Oh, thank you. Yes, well, I appreciate that very much. And I think that makes sense. I just wanted to comment that there may remain to be an issue whether there are certain positive consequences for the school in retiring the URA, which may be in conflict with the positive consequences of the city government to not retire the URA. And so if in fact there comes to light that there is a financial conflict, then I think at that point that would make sense to revisit it, because I'd want to know, like, whose side are you going to be on? Kind of. But for now, we don't have any definitive information on that. So I totally agree to revisit this issue if something comes up whenever this does get postponed. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Other counselors, Judith?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. While we have Jeff here, since it is staff's recommendation tonight that we go forward with an MOU, and I realize we are going to be rescheduling this meeting. It looks like the very first we could hear it again would be July 11th at the very earliest. Is that my understanding?
That would be a work session. Yeah. Well, if we were to have an executive session, we typically try to get it on the first or the third.
So just for the audience here and those listening in who don't know what an MOU is, would you just briefly explain what that is, and also the strengths and weaknesses of an MOU and what that can and potentially cannot do in a situation like
Yeah,
this?
absolutely. Well, so MOU stands for Memorandum of Understanding. And frankly, I'm not a big fan of MOUs because they can be whatever you want them to be. It's kind of a term that's used for maybe it's a binding agreement and maybe it's not. And it really depends upon what you say in the MOU to determines whether it's a binding agreement or not a binding agreement. So typically when I draft my MOUs, if I do, I'll be very clear whether it's binding or not. And frankly, there's no reason why the city and the URA couldn't enter into what's called an IGA, which is an intergovernmental agreement. Frankly, an MOU and an IGA can be exactly the same thing depending upon what the wording is for it. So I guess if the city and the Urban Renewal Authority are interested in doing some kind of an agreement regarding how TIF will be allocated or how projects get approved, I would recommend that we do it via a binding agreement, and the terms of the binding agreement will control, because the URA is a separate legal entity from the city and they can enter into IGAs. So I would probably just try to avoid using the term MOU and not being clear exactly what we're doing here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, since I was the one that asked that question, originally, I just want to say I didn't understand the differences between IGA and MOU. I kind of totally equated them.
You know,
So-
it's funny, I've done this forever, and I think people sort of think an MOU is a little less serious than an IGA. Maybe it's not binding, and if you want to do some kind of an understanding that's not binding, I would do maybe an MOU and be clear exactly how it works.
Yeah.
If you want to do a binding agreement, I would call it an IGA.
Yeah, I'm fine with an IGA. But my second request is that whenever we reschedule this, is that Debbie Sagan be able to attend, scheduled a time when she can attend, when Jim Reese can attend, and when Jeff can be here. And maybe David Neville as well. I leave that to the URA. But I think it's important, and I thought it was most unfortunate that it was scheduled at a date when Debbie, unfortunately, because we had to reschedule it because Jeff couldn't be here and he took precedence. We needed him more at this point than we needed Debbie, but it was unfortunate that Debbie couldn't be here tonight. So
Okay.
that's a request. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good point. So do you have something else? Okay. Yeah, it seems like it's summer, it's scheduling is a little bit tricky. Other council members or comments? I think we're going to be pushing this somewhere into the future. Give Councilman Shada and our finance director an opportunity to work together and clarify some things, which I think would be good. I was having a real hard time trying to correlate the numbers and whatnot. I will say that I took some of the direction as I understand it in Mr. Parker's responses and some of the other information, and tried to do the simple math myself. And I'll say pretty frankly, the way I did the math, it looks like the city would not be injured by dissolving the URA. So it looks to me like it could be a financially prudent decision to dissolve the URA, in my opinion. Now, I guess what that means is it kind of puts a little bit of the burden on Councilman Shada and our finance director to clarify those numbers. And I think it would be appropriate for the URA people to have an opportunity to look at those numbers too. And they'd be welcome to check my math, but I'm gravitating personally towards dissolving the URA. I will listen, but just to be clear, I'm serious about this. Mr. Shada?
I think it's really important that we're all on the same sheet of paper with regard to these numbers and what they mean. I think that is really imperative from a community understanding, okay? Which is why I do not want to stand up and do my presentation, because like I said, the information that was given to us by staff, okay, arrived at 5 o'clock, okay? There was no way between now and then for us to kind of align on these things and me completely, let me give you an example, okay, that happened over the weekend, okay? As a result of Jeff's memo to us, he told us the 1994 School Finance Act, okay, backfills the school district with some numbers. And I wanted to know, and Jeff's memo kind of blathered on a little bit about tier 1 and tier 2, in which I could not find what in the heck that was all about. All right. So out of the blue, okay, on Monday, I called the chief state school district finance officer. And amazingly, and I don't know what I was thinking, okay? She picked up the phone and I said, I have a question about the impact to school district 14 with regard to the URA. And she went, golly, I can't answer that question, but you know what? I'm going to connect you with an analyst in 15 minutes at home. And that person's going to come up with that number. And believe it or not, within a half hour, you know, he was sharing a spreadsheet with me, telling me, goes, enter this formula in this column and you've got your number. And I shared that spreadsheet back with him and he went, yep, that looks like that's correct. So I think it's imperative that we are, I don't want to say to the penny, okay, but pretty close to the dollar about what this impact is, okay, before we make any decision, okay, at all. And so that's why, to me, you know, even though it's in the packet, okay, and I even have a revised presentation that was a little bit sort of kind of, but this is a really, really wicked thing. Let me give you an example. In working with this guy, this analyst of the state, he and I calculated that there's $59 million worth of unreimbursed expenses that URAs have to school districts statewide. I found that number just really rather shocking given the shape that our education system is in. And then Natalie and I were talking just before the meeting, and she was talking about a whole bunch of numbers that the state is still owing school districts for what, the last 5-10 years? And we're all looking at Mark. And so my point is, this is a really, really complicated, gnarly area, okay? And it is really hard to kind of get a grip on what's going on with it. So I appreciate people's indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Nancy?
Thank you. First of all, I feel sorry for the community members who are here because, as you can see, this is incredibly complex. And I know just this packet alone, I spent the past 4 days trying to decipher and understand. So sitting here for a 20-minute presentation, I would find to be impossible, I think. But secondly, my quick math demonstrated that the city would lose a lot of money. So we do have to get our math on the same sheet of music. But secondly, I don't think it's all about money. I think as we're making these decisions, we need to look at additional criteria that is just not how much money we're going to get or not get. We have to look at economic development. We need to look at retaining the tools of the URA and getting that DDA study, the Downtown Development Authority study done so that we can assess that. We need to respect the URA board, who has worked very hard and done a lot of work for this city, not just for the URA. The city benefits from this as well, from the work that they do. We need to not add highly technical workload to our city staff, because eliminating the URA would put a lot more work onto our city staff. We need to retain the momentum that the URA has established over time that would be lost very abruptly if we discontinued it. We need to reduce blight and crime, and the URA is working on that. And we've seen, I mean, just eliminating the LaFun Hotel has done a lot in that regard. And we need to honor, in my opinion, we need to honor our obligations, whether they be URA obligations or city obligations. We have to honor our obligations and our commitments that have been made. So I would like to not just look at dollars and cents, but at all the other things that the URA brings to this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? I guess I would also like to, I'm not going to be quite echoing, definitely not echoing the Mayor Pro Tem's thinking, but some of my thoughts arise from a similar position. It seems to me like, you know, the URA has a mission, okay, and that's defined, and it's pretty territorial, it's pretty small relative to the city. The city, from where the city council is sitting, we have a much bigger obligation. We're taking care of more territory, more people, and we're trying to address more problems. It seems to me like we should use the city's resources to do the most good for the most people for the longest time. And in my mind, the URA got lucky. They hit the jackpot. They have the two marijuana shops. So, I mean, and Manitou hit the jackpot. I mean, the marijuana, obviously, that may be the elephant in the room, but that's been good for the city's coffers, but it's especially been good for the URA. I've entertained the thought of could we spread out the URA so that we could, basically stretch its boundaries and do more good for, say, our commercial district. And so that's part of my thinking, and it's that's what drives it. I think Nancy and I, in a sense, we're both trying to respect processes and the efforts of people to do things, but we have a larger mission on city council. It's, again, the most good for the most people for the longest time. So I guess at this point, it seems like it'd be reasonable to give the RA folks an opportunity if they'd like to speak. Thank you, Becca. I'm sorry, Denise, you got a point?
Mayor, all I was going to ask is, Mr. Shader, you said you've received a spreadsheet from the State Department. Can you share that with Becca so that any other spreadsheets before you meet? I think that will help her be able to look at it. So if you could share that, thank you.
Thank you. And John, if you'd like to bring up more of your friends, your compatriots, certainly feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you. John Maynard, 1320 Indian Oaks Place. I'm the vice chair of the URA board. The first comment, I have really two comments. One will be relatively short and the other maybe a little bit wordy. Share Councilman Shada's concern about getting information on Friday afternoon, and it included not only the staff report, which I thought was fairly concise and easy to understand, but a white paper, which I found unintelligible and difficult to understand where the numbers came from and what have you. And if that white paper is going to be presented, we would like to be able to ask questions, probably page by page, so that we have a thorough understanding and perhaps some corrections in some of the statements and figures. I guess including us, not me, because I'm not a numbers guy, but perhaps Ann, if she'd agree, and Nichols, if she'd agree to do so in the discussions between staff and the white paper author, that would be appropriate. Our board is very comfortable with the staff recommendation, which is to create essentially an outline of how we do business together between the Urban Renewal Board and the City Council. And if you look historically at urban renewal, the council did a blight study, determined that there was a need for improvement on the east side of the city, caused to be promulgated an urban renewal plan, which was the initial direction and created the Urban Renewal Board, which was the initial council direction to the board in terms of what they should be doing. After that, the board created a land use model, which was adopted by council, or at least accepted by council, which further defined what the URA should be doing or looking at and trying to encourage redevelopment within the district. Recently, you've created a new land use code referenced tonight, which also gives direction, which is not necessarily the same direction that you see in either the urban renewal plan or in the land use model. So that tells me that there is certainly a need for some understanding of what council would like to see happen, would like to see what the URA board does. And the way to do that is either the intergovernmental agreement or memorandum of understanding. We have been going forward on, at least in my involvement with the board, based on the policies that council has directed us to, versus being the urban renewal plan, the blight study, the land use model, and what have you. And if that's not council direction, you should tell us that. We're here to serve the community just as you are. And maybe we have slightly different views on how that should happen. But by and large, the council gives direction. And the direction that we are getting now is mixed messages. I'd make one comment about marijuana. Council again decided that the only place that marijuana could be sold, recreational marijuana, was in the urban renewal district. So we think that was intentional, that you were telling us you now have a funding source through this marijuana tax, 60% of which goes to General City, 40% toward the URA when granted by the city. Telling us that now you have a funding source, go do some things. And the URA did that. We participated in the county project, the West Side Avenue project. I think that we were very successful in making sure that the entryway to the city tells you you're in a different place than you were when you were on the other side of the arch. The streetscape, the color of the sidewalk, the street lights, those types of things are different in Manitou than they are elsewhere. And we think that's important. Just like the holiday lights are important. We want people to know that they're in Manitou once they cross that archway on the east side of town. Those are my comments. There may be comments from other members of the board. They didn't know I was going to say any of this, by the way, except maybe that we agree with the staff's recommendation to you. Be glad to answer questions.
Any questions for Mr. Maynard? I guess not. Okay, thank you, John.
We have several board members here, Ann Nichols, Alan Delwich, Marcy Morrison, and former board member, Mark Snyder.
And you have your attorney here also. I guess it would be supporting for anyone, any of those folks who'd like to speak, to give them a chance to address council. Or if you want to think about it and come back another day, we could make that available too.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, John. Do we have any other URA affiliated people who'd like to speak?
Good evening, President Graham, President Pro Tem Fortune, council members, David Neville, attorney for the Manitou Springs URA. I just wanted to respond to one thing that I saw in the memo and heard here again tonight, that the URA goes away after 8 years. And that is not the case. The authority does not go away. The area expires after the 25-year period, but the authority's existence is perpetual. So I wanted to make sure everyone understood that.
Mr. Neville, could you get the microphone just a little closer there? This is being streamed, so about 3 inches. Please continue.
Okay. Wanted to make sure everyone understood that the authority's existence is perpetual, and it's the plan itself that expires. And I'm not sure that's been clear, but I just wanted to make that point. Also, since I'm here, I would correct the record. I think there are 2 TIF agreements, and the other one is with Paragon. And even though those obligations are fully funded, there are rights that are important for the URA to enforce. But I would not want to lose sight of that agreement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Neville. Jim, do you have anything? Okay, great. Thanks. All right. Anybody else wants to speak to this, URA or just general public? Okay. If not, I think we have direction to move forward on, Mr. Sheda and Finance Director. Great. Okay. We should be taking a break here pretty quick, but I'd like to get one last item before we do that. That's item G4, Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments and Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority. So Judy, if you could get out my 84-page slide presentation. I'm sorry, this is going to be quick. So we had our PPACG and PPRTA meetings last Wednesday. I characterize most of it as housekeeping, not necessary to elaborate on here. There was one important thing, and that was PPRTA. Manitou had gone back to, and council is somewhat familiar with this, gone back and we said that over the 18 years, we've had 15 years where we put more in than we got out. And so there was an adjustment made. There was a unanimous vote by the the PPRTA directors last Wednesday to grant Manitou Springs an additional $600,000 for our programs, our capital programs. So we have that. There was also a decision made as part of that, and council's familiar with this. This is part of the offer we heard last week. Decision made for the Citizens Advisory Committee, which is a subset of PPRTA, to go and rethink how the money is distributed. It's been based for maintenance purposes on population, and although it's not restricted to population, for capital projects, it's by and large amounted to that. So we've gotten significantly less over time than what we put in, or at least when you do the math, we felt we came out short. So that's good news for Manitou. There's no objection. We'll take excuse me, Natalie.
Who from Manitou represents us on the Citizens Advisory?
We have both of them here. We have Ann Nichols and Alan Delwich. They're our two representatives.
Thank you.
Hey, Mayor, I have a question.
Sure.
Do we have a date certain to postpone the URA discussion?
No, we do
Was
not.
that- Do we need a motion and a second on that? To put it, ensure it's back on the calendar?
No, it's contingent upon Becca's availability and also John's availability for the two of them to get together. Currently, I believe Becca has an audit which she is performing, and that's we have legal deadlines on that. And then the next piece of big work she has to do is our mid-year budget adjustment. So those are two kind of hard and fast dates that we have to give her some breathing space to get that done. So we do not have a date certain, but I guess my quick guess is maybe August, probably not before. Nancy, Counselor.
I thought that, I'm sorry. I thought that Judith had thrown out July 11th, but then I couldn't really tell if that date was circulated or discussed, or if you think that's too early for Becca.
It is too early, yeah. Judith had mentioned, I think that was in the context of something else.
Just, I mentioned July 11th would be the very first time, because we will be gone. Council will not meet for the next 2 weeks, and that would be a work session. So that we have to factor that in.
Right. So that was one factor, but then the other factor is just the ability to get, the other work that's ahead of that, and that's required for us to, by law to get that stuff done. So that's what's driving that, Julie. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Nancy?
Thank you. I just wanted to express my support for Mr. Maynard's suggestion to have Ann or Jim, whomever, a representative from the URA, to participate in the meetings with John, Shada, and Becca. I think that representation is also important.
Mr. Shade, I see you nodding. So, yeah, okay, we're in agreement. Okay, that would be great, because if we can agree on the numbers, I think that would help us a great deal. Okay, let's take a 15-minute break. Hi, could we get to our seats and we'll get back to business? Okay, thanks, everyone. Oops, hang on, we'll get Mr. Shada back here.
Mayor, if I may, Counselor Wolf hung up right after break. So I don't know if she's planning on coming back in or not, but I want to let you know that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Let's, I guess we'd say that Counselor, if in the minutes you acknowledge that, and unless she comes back, we'll just say that she left the meeting at the time we took the break.
7:48.
Yeah,
Thank you.
if that sounds reasonable. We're just Councilman Shada short. Rob, could you see if John's out there and tell him to ask him if he'd come back, please? Okay, next item of business is H2. It's second reading and public hearing of ordinance number 0823, an ordinance adding a new chapter 2.10 of the City of Manitou Springs Municipal Code concerning task forces and working groups. And this will include a public hearing tonight. Guess I will look to our city attorney if he'd like to make any comments before we get started to start this.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Just really briefly, this is just adding a new chapter 210 to your municipal code. And the whole point of this was to clarify, when a citizen group, a group of individuals is actually an official, like local public body of the city, for purposes of when the kind of local government laws apply to it. And also to address issues like when do they have to comply with Open Meetings Law, Open Records Act? Do they have immunity? Does the city's insurance cover their activity? That kind of thing. And so we've had some groups in the city that kind of form on their own, and the city may provide some resources to them. City may provide staff members to go to meetings, but there was some confusion as to what exactly makes them an official city group. And so this ordinance with this new chapter clarifies that it basically has to occur via a resolution passed by the city council pursuant to, public notice and a regular meeting. Just if you call yourself the Manitou Springs, whatever, without a resolution from city council, you're not an official city group. So that was just the general purpose of this ordinance, and it kind of lays out how that works.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Council, any questions for Mr. Parker at this point? If not, I guess I would like to declare the public comment portion of this open. If there's anyone here who'd like to speak to this, Mr. Dannon? Again, we've got. Okay, if you'd give us your name and address, and if you can keep your remarks to 3 minutes, that would be great.
My name is Rob Dannon. I live at 112 Cave Avenue. And yes, I'll be respectful of the 3 minutes that I have. I just wanted to talk about, I know I contacted all of council on this matter and heard back from several of you, which I appreciate. And as it was explained to me, that city council will not necessarily seek to work with task forces or working groups via a resolution, as Mr. Parker just mentioned. Yet still allow and hopefully encourage interested and motivated community members to serve in an advisory capacity on initiatives within the city. And so if that's the way I'm understanding it, I have much greater relief in terms of it not inhibiting community-based initiatives and working with the city and killing a vital part of our town in which it's civic involvement by its community members. And if that is in fact the case, in reading over the ordinance, while I have lots of questions, or at least several questions on the ordinance itself, I would stick to just 2 points. And the first point is, with my preface that hopefully that council will still encourage, without a resolution, community group involvement, such as what the Carnegie Library Task Force has done. I would like to point out on page 2 of the ordinance, in reference to that new chapter, I guess, that you just mentioned, which is 210, item B. If I can just read a abridged version of that, it says, any group or individuals not formed pursuant to the provisions of chapter 210, and I'm going to abridge it here, shall not be affiliated in any way with the city. So if that is the case, it sounds as if you're not encouraging community-based involvement. Because if we're not, if a group is not working via resolution, let me just state that again, it is to be, shall not be affiliated in any way with the city. Now, looking back again at our task force, we were highly affiliated with the city. We needed to be, we wanted to be. But the way I read this is, if we don't have a resolution going forward, you will not work with any community-based groups. So I wanted to point that out for further clarification, if possible. And the other point is probably more rhetorical than anything else. If a resolution is to be granted for any reason, and again, my understanding is you're not seeking to have resolutions with community groups and task forces. But if there were to be, I hope that the parties are aware prior to that resolution of the conditions of being usurped by the city government and becoming part of city operations rather than an independent group. And that would also be stated in any such resolution prior to signing. So those are my points, and I thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Mr. Parker?
Yeah,
Did
I'd be happy to address the use of the word affiliated. By affiliated, I meant like an affiliate of the city, like some kind of legal relationship between the group and the city. I didn't mean that the city should shun them. And so I think that, frankly, with non-official city task force or working groups, city's certainly free to listen to anything they have to say. The city's free to even, depending on exactly what they're doing, to provide financing, to ask staff to assist with certain things. There's no reason why you would not want to hear from interested members of your community, whether they are individuals or are working together as a group. The purpose was just to basically be clear legally that they are not representing the city and are not taking any action on behalf of the city. So that's why I use the word affiliated there.
Thank you. I think that helps clarify matters. Thank you. Nancy? And if you could be about 3 inches from the microphone.
Nancy Wilson, 227 Pilot Knob. I wasn't planning on speaking to this tonight, and I apologize that I haven't read the ordinance. I think I'm a guilty party on a couple of organizations, Manitou Springs Bear Smart and the Electric Vehicle Charging Station Task Force that both used the name Manitou Springs in just the titles of forming the groups. And I hope there's some specific language in the ordinance around the use of the name Manitou Springs. It would be, from my point of view, it would be really hard, for example, Manitou Bear Smart to not have used the name in the title of the group. You'll notice that the Bear Smart cans around town say Manitou Springs Bear Smart. We didn't seek permission for that, and that's why I say guilty party. But it's hard from a citizen's perspective to form, a grassroots organization without using the name, especially if you're going to work with other citizens groups or other entities in surrounding areas and that kind of thing. So I would appreciate clarification on that. From my perspective, as long as we can avoid the whole open meeting laws, blah, 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 as a smaller organization, I would, I wouldn't, you don't need any ordinance for most of what I want to do. But I think clarification is really important because as Rob stated, what we wouldn't want to do is discourage anyone from organizing, trying to do something better for our town as an individual or a small group. So if you can clarify that, and then if, I guess from a positive point of view, I'd like to hear why you think, why it would behoove a group to come for an ordinance. To me, it just means like money or land or something like that. If you wanted to work with the city on something like that. I mean, we had a great working relationship with the electric vehicle charging stations. We wrote the grant, the city approved the grant, it went in under the city's name and the money's coming to the city, all without an ordinance. And under this case, I think we would have maybe had to have an ordinance. No.
No, I can address that too, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Yeah, if you would, Jeff.
Yeah, so first of all, the ordinance doesn't, and nor was it the intent of the ordinance to basically dictate how people want to name their Manitou Springs community organizations. Really, the underlying intent here was every day I hear about some new Manitou Springs, whatever group. And, it's part of the issue with using the name Manitou Springs or whatever is people could think, oh, this has got to be an official city group. And I think even some members of some of these groups think that they may be an official city group. And so the issue is that, the city needs to be careful when it's establishing official city groups and not to sort of give the impression that these citizens are actually working on behalf of the city, because it does affect a lot of legal issues that the city could end up getting caught up in. And frankly, for the groups themselves, you don't want to have somebody come to you and say, why aren't you complying with the Colorado Open Meetings Law? Where are your open records, retention? And you're like, well, we don't know anything about that. And so we want to be clear for the city's benefit and for the citizens' benefit. And there was no intent to say you can't use the name Manitou Springs. I don't think that there's any real trademarkable use of the name Manitou Springs unless it's being used in a way that is confusing people intentionally, I guess, with being part of the city itself. So I hope that answers your questions.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Anybody else? Marcy.
So now I'm in big trouble here.
Thank you, Council. Nice to see you all. Interesting meeting, Mayor.
Marcy, believe it or not, we're going to ask you to introduce yourself and give us your address.
Oh, yes.
I know this is going out to the TV world too, so.
I keep forgetting. Marcy Morrison, 302 Sutherland Place, Manitou Springs. Ladies and gentlemen, this item particularly interested me because I know how much we rely on our citizens to do some things that council can't do or is uncomfortable doing it or wants somebody outside the circle of the staff to undertake a project. And I think it just needs to be clear. And I think tonight is an example, Mayor, where this clarification helps. And I'm suggesting one more little addition, and that is when we appoint somebody, when you appoint someone, and I come to you and I decide that I want to be on one of the boards or one of the committees, that's someone within the city organization, or it could be a council person, take the time to sit down with me and explain the role of the committee and explain the relationship between the city and myself as to what are the responsibilities of both. I'm surprised myself as a private citizen over the years that I have been now, that how many people know so little about how the city organization or a county organization, whatever, how they work. I don't think they understand it. I know they don't understand it because they ask me some of the questions. Well, what did you do? How did that happen? How come I didn't know about it? Sentences, questions like that trouble me because it means, of course, now we have an excuse. We haven't had a newspaper who could explain the way the organization works. But still, one and all, I think we all play a part in making sure that when someone suggests to you, why don't you run for city council? And the first comment that I get back is, what did they do? That's kind of scary. So that would be my only suggestion, Mayor, is that somebody within the organization, the city organization, takes the time. And I realize you may get a lot of applications flowing through the process, but somebody take the time to explain to the person, what does this mean? How much time will I have to spend? That they usually ask. When do the meetings occur? They ask that, but explain to them how the process works. And that there is usually a chairman and a vice chairman and et cetera. I think it would solve the problem that came up with Rob just now, not understanding, well, does that mean that we won't get help from the city anymore? These are questions, especially if you're an ad hoc committee. And my 3 minutes is up. I know that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcy. Good points. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this? Okay. I guess I would like to respond on a couple of things. And Marcy, you make I think a really good point. And when we have people who are appointed to our advisory boards, typically one of the things we require is a letter from the chair of that board saying, so-and-so has applied. We endorse them. We'd like to have them. I mean, and there's not a checklist that said they've gone through all the steps that you indicated. Maybe we should do something like that. Say they've been vetted and give them some sort of orientation. But it's sort of been implied that they've done that. And I guess in part we're happy to have a volunteer. But usually the letters that council sees, they come from the chair of a board, and they say so and so has attended a couple of our meetings, or they've served as an alternate and now would like to be a regular member, and that's fine. And when it comes to things like the city's recognized advisory boards and our commissions, we have a process, and we have an ordinance that defines. We have several ordinances that define all those roles. When we have an ad hoc group that just forms, and this is kind of what you're speaking to. This is, the people rise up and they want to do something, and God bless them. Most of the time, they do some sort of good thing, and we depend on that. We understand that. We also have occasions when the people rise up and they don't necessarily get along, and they think they have some sort of official relationship with the city. I guess affiliate would be Mr. Parker's word, and that somehow the city owes them staff time or money or et cetera. And they have really no form. They're very free form. The city's fine with them being free form. They're not part of the city. The city has we don't vet or appoint those people. We don't even require that they be Manitou residents. I mean, and that's caused us a few little rubs. So we wanted to clarify that. I think probably the driving thing has become the burden of the opens meeting law. That's council. I think just in the last 3 years, we've seen it interpreted by the courts somewhat more in a more restrictive sense.
experiencing a city issue until there's a hole in the road that has not been addressed, or there's something about something the city has not done. They have never come to a meeting. They may have written an email to somebody if they know who their council person is. And you can say, well, that's easy to find out. But I'm talking about these sort of ad hoc types of issues that come up. And these people have never before called, for instance, the clerk, or they've never know that we have a finance office, et cetera. I could go on and on. They never know about it until they need it. They need an answer. They want an answer. That's what I'm talking about. And you would not normally know that. But when these people, and then you say to them, well, did you know that there was such and such a committee that really addresses these issues? No, et cetera. That was what I was talking about.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies things. Good. Doesn't seem like council wants to discuss this much anymore. Maybe it's time for a motion. Judith, you had a comment there?
No, but I'm ready to make a motion. I think I can do it.
Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Last call. Anybody want to speak? I'm going to close the public comment part. Okay, public comments over.
Okay, I move that we approve on second reading and public hearing ordinance 0823 and ordinance adding a new chapter 2.10 of the City of Manitou Springs Municipal Code concerning task forces and working groups, amending section 2.10.040 formation section B to put a period after working group and eliminating the rest of the sentence in that paragraph.
Second.
A motion is second. Any further discussion? One comment I would have is I don't think the period and deleting the balance of the sentence really affects it. I take the city attorney's advice on that. So, but I'm happy to support that. So, okay, if there's no further discussion, let's vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so Rob, Nancy, Marcy, thanks for your comments. We appreciate it. Cheers. Okay, let's move along here. Okay, so now we're to the Soda Springs Park Master Plan. Okay. This is episode 42. Excuse me, Denise, do you have a
Mayor, I
comment?
just want to make a question. Was it noted that when Julie was not part of the meeting, when Councilor Wolf?
I'm sorry. Yeah, Judy had called that to my attention that she dropped off when we took our break. And so the minutes are going to reflect that she left then. We thought maybe she'd come back, but since she hasn't, I think we'll just say that she left at the break. Seems fair. Okay, so Soda Springs Park Master Plan. Ladies, if you'll introduce yourselves.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council. My name is Mia Reckesens with Horde Copeland Macht.
Danufat, Chair of Parab.
I should also probably mention I'm a landscape designer for the Soda Springs Master Plan. All right, so tonight I would very happy to present the final master plan and incorporated comments from the previous City Council meeting from May 9th, as well as additional comments that we received when we met with Parab on June 5th. And if we could pull up the master plan, what I'd like to do is just do a quick summary of the previous City Council meeting, address some of those comments, and then present the master plan, but we can have it up on the screen as well, just for reference. There's also a hard copy to my left as well, if that's easier. I know the font's a little small. All right, so on the May 9th City Council meeting, we addressed a few main topics that I'm just going to really quickly review. The first one was the removal of artificial turf and replacing that with natural sod in the plaza space just west of the pavilion, and that was approved by council. The second was the reduction of concrete and the removal of parking within the park to make a more pedestrian-friendly space, especially on the east side behind the pavilion. And that was also approved by City Council. And the third one was the water feature. And there was a lot of discussion around this one as far as what the water feature entails for Soda Springs Park. And it was ultimately decided that not having an actual structure, but acknowledging that the Fountain Creek is the water feature. And so many people have benefited from visiting this park and appreciating the natural water, and not only appreciating it, but acknowledging that there are cost benefits and water savings. And it's in an age of drought, it's just a little bit of a concern to have an additional structure. So per City Council's direction and in conversations with Parab, we have addressed this by removing from the master plan the structure of a water feature and adding 2 additional improved creek access points to the creek. And if you could change the slide to the master plan, I can kind of just direct you as a viewer to where those are located. Next slide. Oh. Well, it'll come up in a minute, but it's along the creek, just to the west of the existing pavilion and on the south portion of the site. So right along Fountain Creek, we have 2 additional almost mini versions of what was constructed on phase 1. So it's not quite as large, but it still has the same look and feel. And it has some nice boulder, natural access down into that creek. So another topic that was talked about last time was bicycles and the circulation and parking of bicycles. So it was discussed the various locations and types of bicycle storage facilities. One was being a bike ride location, and the second being bike lockers. After discussing with Parab on June 5th, we were informed that the bike ride station is now planned to be added to Cannon Avenue and is no longer needed within Soda Springs Park. So that portion has been removed from the master plan and restored with natural planting. And as far as the bike lockers go, there was a few additional conversations we've had with Parab and Kevin Stevenson, who is part of the Parking and Mobility organization. There's still some conversations as far as the model and type of bike lockers that are to be added to the park. However, we just wanted to point out that some of these lockers, there's a lot of different sizes and shapes and access from either one side or the other. So what we're proposing is keeping the symbol of a location to be incorporated into the master plan, but the actual product and circulation of that to be figured out when that phase is completed or worked through construction documents. So for the master plan purposes, we've indicated a location for the bike lockers, but just to be transparent, doesn't have to be the final location, and it is incorporated into the cost, but that's something we can work with Parab and Kevin as far as the actual model that's requested for that park. There were a couple additional considerations that were brought up at the last meeting that I just wanted to quickly go over. Burying of the electrical transformer to allow for more planting in that space and a little bit less of an eyesore. So the city contacted the utility provider and determined that burying the transformer is not an option. However, we acknowledge that a transformer can be a little bit of an eyesore. So we're proposing it to be wrapped in some kind of artistic graphic that could be a nice opportunity for the local art groups to design something for that. And the art would need to be approved by the utility provider as far as having some kind of material wrapped around it. But that would be what we recommend just to make it a little bit of a nicer amenity. And another comment that was brought up by Councilman Shada, as far as some of the retaining walls on the northwest side of the park, there seems to be a little bit of a structural concern. There's some crumbling of some concrete along that wall. And we acknowledged that and went out there and took some photos of it. However, we would need a structural engineer to really address the amount of damage or possible recommendations that would be needed to repair that wall. And we don't have a structural engineer as part of our master plan team right now. So we did not incorporate those improvements into the master plan, but that is definitely something that should be considered in the future. And the audio improvements to the existing pavilion was another topic that was brought up at the last meeting. And similar kind of situation, an acoustical engineer would need to be brought onto the team, and some of the desires from the city as far as what would need to be installed in that pavilion, and then some recommendations from that acoustical engineer would definitely help produce an estimated cost. So that as well was not incorporated into the master plan, but just wanted to address that point. And I believe I'm more than happy to go over the rest of the master plan, but I believe everyone from the city council is already familiar with it. However, if you have specific questions, I'm very more than happy to go over it again or point out anything within the cost estimate or additional things that were included in the packet. Thank
Okay.
you.
Council comments, questions? So Denise and then John.
I just want to mention that area that she mentioned was a transformer. That's not a transformer. That's their switch that manages all of Manitou Springs. And so you can't underground that. That's the reason why that can't be underground.
Okay, thank you. John?
I'm sorry, I have a momentary brain flip. I forgot what I was going to ask. Sorry.
Okay, well, you keep thinking. Let's see if anybody else has something. Any other comments? Yeah, we've been down this path here several times, and it seems like the last time we addressed this, we managed just to have, I think, that basically 3 topics, a few things in the punch list. I'm personally pretty happy with this. I thank you for the work you've done. I would certainly welcome other comments from council. John, you?
Yes, I remembered what it is. As people might know, in the general area down there, CenturyLink is pulling fiber rapidly in those neighborhoods. One of the things I noticed is that it appears like to me that all the overhead utilities are buried on Park Avenue. And the only thing that's remaining is a rather unsightly CenturyLink cable that comes from that horrible pole at the corner of Canyon and Park Avenue and right there. And I noticed recently they were busy with that big thing. And it seems like to me under our franchise agreement that if the utilities are otherwise buried in that area, I believe CenturyLink should be burying that cable, and that's going across the park. And I believe there's a pole there, okay, that also feeds the back of those buildings. And it seems like to me we ought to enforce our portion of the CSU, franchise agreement that says the CenturyLink get that stuff underground, because I think that would, get rid of a very unsightly utility line that's going across the park. And that's why I'm bringing it up in this discussion. So I know it doesn't have anything to do with the master plan. I think it's just essentially a staff thing of contacting, CenturyLink and saying, you know what, before you guys get going with a big fiber optic bundle attached to that thing, which will be the next thing that they'll tie on to that, you know, and we'll have even a bigger wad of cables going across Soda Springs Park. So I think it's something we can aesthetically clean up, and that's nice to know that that box has specialized voodoo in it that, you know, can't be buried. So thanks for the report.
Great. Thank you, John. Nancy?
Thanks. And I also have a comment that really has nothing to do with Soda Springs Park, but it was raised as an issue. So, and that is, do we have a strategy and overall plan for bike ride, bike racks, bike lockers, et cetera? It seems like we're just plopping them down. But I don't know, there might be a strategy to how we're doing this. So I would just really like to know if there's a comprehensive plan for all these things go in terms of bicycle infrastructure.
We don't
And
have a full,
who's making the decisions.
well, we don't have a full plan yet, but the Pike Ride connection was discussed already. I think it was a year or 2 years ago that we need a connection from this end of town to the other end of town. So that's really all we're adding at this point. But we do need to look at how we're going to connect the rest of the bikes or micro mobility throughout the area.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I am thrilled that you're getting something at the west end of town. I guess I was looking for something a little bit more specific. I personally, and I know council's okay with it, but I personally was not crazy about the idea of putting a bike locker in Soda Springs Park. It just seems like there would be other alternatives, and I don't know. I'm concerned at the decision to put the Pike Ride station in the Cannon parking lot. Is that the most strategically beneficial place to put it? I don't know. You guys may have worked through all of that, but it just seems to me that there would be other better locations for it, but I don't know. And I've not been part of that discussion. I just am concerned about it.
There were two options that we haven't fully decided yet, either Cannon or actually on Park Avenue, which would be there at Soda Springs. Now, the bike lockers, I'm not involved with at this point on that installation, so I'm not sure about all that. So, but the bike area was either going to be Cannon or Park. Initially, it was going to be near the Kodiak Bear, but that changed. So we were looking at either Park or Cannon Avenue, which is still close to the park. And if they do bike lockers, I guess it would be a benefit still, or close enough to work.
Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, congratulations on this great plan. You did a phenomenal job incorporating what we talked about last time, and you put it in such an easy to read format with different font colors, and I just so appreciate that. I do want to make one comment about the bike lockers, and this is just an FYI only, because the e-bike voucher pilot program came to you with bike lockers, and we got together immediately afterwards and realized the error of our ways, that the bike locker conversation is a much bigger conversation that needs to be had. So we have separated the two, and with the intention of bringing bike infrastructure back at a time when council can hear that. So those are separate issues. Now, I do have one question, and that is in regards to the three phases: the playground, the east, and the west. Is there flexibility in which phase we start with? Because I'm thinking about this from a financial standpoint. Obviously, the west side, the price tag is considerably lower than, say, the playground. So I was just throwing that out as a point of conversation on which phase we would be able to begin with, or if that's already been discussed prior.
That's a great question. We've talked about the different phases internally as far as what makes the most sense. And the reason the phase 3, so the west side improvements, being so close to the playground improvements would be a great opportunity to incorporate those two phases together if there's the funds for it. But there's absolutely flexibility as far as what phase comes next and what makes the most sense. And financially for the city, that would be a big determination. But there's absolutely flexibility with whatever phase is next. Did you want to?
The reason why we're moving forward with phase 2 is because council approved it and that it consisted of the playground improvements with some path modifications. There is that possibility that we can wrap the west side improvements into that phase 2 as well, but it's a question of funds and where they're going to come from.
I'm sorry, Nancy, please.
Yeah, and that also is another concern that I have is what the funding straight, if you guys have dealt or have started to put together a funding strategy, because there's not barely enough to complete all of this as per the cut sheets currently. And you can't just, I mean, you could just complete 1 or 2 phases or 1.5 phase, whatever, but you're still with what you currently have, but then you're going to need to look at matching funds and so on. So I think a strategy for how you're to me, that's the next step is what is the strategy for funding this thing? Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Anybody? If not, would anyone like to make a motion?
I move to approve modifications to the Soda Springs Park Master Plan.
Seconded by Councilor Chandler. Any further discussion? Let's vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Great, thank you. Thank you, ladies. Mr. Shada?
Specifically, how much are we sure, without me looking through the packet here, what's the next phase funding requirement, not the playground component? What's that? I know you know what
Not
it is.
including the playground?
No, not including the playground.
The
I
next.
think we've already funded the playground.
Right.
So I'm interested what the next phase costs, just real quick. Can you, off the top of your head, I know you'll be able to find it quicker than I will be.
I
on
have
mine.
those figures here. The west is 491,606. East is 543,707 is what was in the packet.
491, right?
The total of
491.
all is 1,716,138.
Right. So for at least the next 2 phases, that one, and then the playground was about that amount, wasn't it?
The playground was about 680, 825.
Okay. So I just want to confirm that you're advising us to combine those 2 things together. And I think you told us this last time that you thought that that would get us a broader set of bidders in the whole 9 yards, correct?
That's correct. With a larger scope, you get a broader set of bidders.
Okay, exactly. Maybe some better prices, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
if there's nothing else, thank you, ladies. Okay, next time, I'm sorry, Denise.
Mayor, could I just introduce Jillian real quick and have her come up?
Oh,
She's
yes,
with the
please,
Parks
please
and
do
Rec
so, yeah.
Director.
Mhm. Yes,
And just say a few words and she can introduce herself if you don't mind, since this is the Parks and Rec.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jillian Rossi. I don't normally sound like this. I'm suffering from some sinus issues, but I'm thrilled to be here tonight. Thrilled that the Soda Springs Master Plan just passed. That's totally made my Tuesday. But I'm your new Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Manitou Springs, and happy to answer any questions you might have. I was formerly with the City of Colorado Springs as the Senior Park Ranger for the Trails, Open Space, and Parks Stewardship Program, so the TOPS program.
great, thank you. Questions, comments from council? Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, well, it's summertime. I'm sure you're getting the opportunity to learn a lot of things real quick.
Absolutely. It's been great.
Okay, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Great.
Hey, Mayor, can I add one thing that she also is one of the experts on the incline? And since 2020, we worked on the incline together. So she has a lot of knowledge to share with Manitou and help us in that management.
Oh, great. Thank you. That's a good point. And I'm sure you have contacts in Colorado Springs then that would especially appreciate your information about the incline.
Definitely. Thanks for including
Great.
that, Roy.
Okay.
All right, thank
Great.
you.
Great, thanks. Okay. Okay, that brings us to I3, approval of purchase of a Vector truck. I believe Mr. Cheney's going to handle that.
Yes, I'll start it. And if you need to know financial information, then Becca can chime in. But I was hoping that, of course, that we would have no issues with our vehicles. But our vac truck in the sewer department is no longer functioning properly. It was purchased in 2015. The lifespan of a vac truck is 7 to 10 years. It's on its 8th year. We did about 7 months ago start increasing our use of the vac truck to flush the lines more often, up to what they should be doing in cities. A lot more of chemical cleaning was done here in Manitou. We're trying to get away from use of chemicals the best we can. Plus, they're very expensive at $800 for about 3.5 gallons of a chemical for a sewer. And of course, we have 26 miles of sewer, so very expensive. So we're doing the flushing up to 5 times a week. And now the unit is just not cooperating. It's falling apart. It's a rolling chassis issue. Can't get up the hillsides as well. We've checked with the manufacturer. We've checked with our contacts, and it's just probably not worth trying to put money into this thing. So at this point, we're requesting that we get a new vac truck. This would be a demoed version, which would then still be the cost of a regular vac truck. The difference, which this one is that it also saves us quite a bit of water. So in comparison, our current vac truck uses about 20,000 gallons a week. And this one will use about 2,700 gallons a week. And it's because it recycles. So we'll be able to even maybe go further than a week with it. But that's going to help us a lot in saving water. And then we want to continue this proactive approach to cleaning our sewer lines, which are very aging and troublesome, and continue to reduce our chemical use as needed. So at this point, I'm asking for the money to purchase this. And if you have questions on how, then Becca can answer those questions.
Okay, thank you, Roy. And Becca, maybe it'd be a good idea if you'd walk us through the financing plan here.
Okay, so this would be a second lease purchase for earlier city council approved a lease purchase with I believe the interest rate was about 3.98. I would hope it'll be less than 5%, but I always try to make sure that I overestimate the cost rather than underestimate the cost. So a 10-year lease purchase for $600,000 would cost on an annual basis $74,000. So the fiscal impact would be, the sewer fund would be paying $74,000 a year for the next 10 years.
Okay, thank you. Becca, I guess I ran just a calculator, just an online calculator at home, and I got a different number, and it was, yeah, I think you're the expert, so
it's a simple formula that involves you use your 10 years and the current value of the loan, and future value of the loan would be 0 at 5% with 1 payment per year. So, we start the payments when we close the loan. I mean, you have 2 options there. You can start your payments when you close the loan, and that decreases the interest you have to pay over the entire length of the loan, or you start your payments a year from when you start your loan. That increases your interest. So I always start the first payment when the loan is closed. So the overall interest rate, the overall total payments would be $740,000 because it's $74,000 times 10 years. So and then the cost would be $600,000. So the overall interest paid would be 140,000.
Okay, thank you. That's closer to what I got.
Right.
Okay.
It's a formula I use on Excel. It's the
Okay.
payment formula.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's pretty close to what I got, so I was just double checking that.
Okay.
Okay. Council questions or comments? And Judith?
Well, they're expensive. Based on the memo, they have a shelf life of about 7 to 10 years. So what I'm hearing you saying is we purchase this and then by the time we're done with our lease purchase, it's time for another one. Are we planning on selling the one that we currently have? Is that possible to sell that?
Yes, we will put that on Purple Wave and auction it off.
Okay.
Sometimes we get pretty good recovery of costs through because they will sell parts. Some parts obviously are still usable. Sometimes someone needs it for a different purpose where ours is more critical than maybe their use because it can be used for many things, including even picking up chemicals that spill, things like that. So maybe they don't use it like us 5 times a week. But yes.
So I ballpark guess.
Oh,
I
I
won't
guess
hold you
if
to it, I
I,
promise.
yeah, I mean, I would love to see it, maybe 100,000 if we're lucky. It may be better. It depends. Yeah, it really varies.
My second question was, it looks like on paper that this new truck would be a lot more water efficient. I like that. But in the memo, and maybe this was just a typo, you listed a demo discount of 50,000 and in the contract itself, the demo discount was 6,944. So I was confused about that.
Yes, the demo, the discount is going to vary. It's up to 50,000 now. We're actually going to try to push for 80 to 100,000 discount because they continue to demo this product until we decide to take it. And since it's a demo unit, it actually is not a bad deal because they demo it out on sites with other cities. And some of the kinks might be worked out of the unit versus a brand new one. So it's still fairly new, but not like a used one like, you know, that we would sell or we buy in somewhere that range that could be 200,000. We're not sure of the problems. So the price is still, we're going to try to push as we go to purchase this if we can get even a little bit more off, depending on how many more cities they brought it to in the meantime.
And it sounds like this is a critical piece of equipment that we need. And so then will you be updating council on as you get more information on this? Because it looks to me that we really need to move forward, but I was just concerned with some of the numbers here on paper, but you've answered my questions. Thank you.
Yes, we'll continue to let council know. And also I do want to stress a couple of things. You know, the reason they last 7 to 10 years is because the idling, you know, if we go out 5 days a week at 8 hours a day to flush, which is what we are actually planning to do and have been trying to do with the old unit. It idles at highway speeds. So if you ever push your gas accidentally in neutral, that's what the engine has to rev up to while we're running the vac. So that's why it doesn't last. Idling's the worst on engines, and then city driving, and then the best you can ever do is go on the highway. The vehicles are much better on the highway. So that's where it really tears up the engine. Not a lot we can do about it. They are looking at some alternatives of a separate type engine on some things in the future. Really haven't been tested out yet. This seems to be the latest and best product from the conferences that were attended. And Fort Morgan is using one since 2017 and had much success with it so far. They still have it and it's working well. And then the other thing I do want to stress too, because this was promised to council in February, is that the fleet plan. So we are working on a fleet plan. It'll be presented in September to council. And the idea is we don't run into these problems in the future. We'll know when it's time to purchase the vehicle and we can plan on it. So that will be all for all city vehicles, not just the vac truck. So.
I like that idea, Roy. It's these surprises, you know, they come in at like 600,000 or a bucket truck, which is also expensive, not nearly what a Vector truck is. But for us to be able to plan ahead, I think, and anticipate problems, I think the schedule that you're talking about would be a great thing for the city to have. Good. Council, other questions, concerns? I think maybe we're at time for a motion then.
Move to approve the purchase of the demoed Vector truck with a 10-year lease purchase.
Okay, we had Judith seconded. Okay, so any further discussion? Let's vote.
Six to zero in favor.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Roy. Okay, let's see. Okay, next, consideration of making July the 3rd a paid day off for city employees. Okay. There was a brief memo that I put together in the council packet. I think we all have the background on that. Guess I'll open it for discussion. Or we could just go around the table and see how people feel. Michelle, you were in favor of last week. I presume you're in favor of this week?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in favor. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Judith?
I am in favor of giving non-essential personnel July 3rd as a paid holiday.
Nancy?
I am not in favor, and I just want, I think we've got the best staff we've had in a very long time, if ever. But I just think we've given sufficient days off, and as stated in your memo, this is the height of our season, and having folks off or giving the entire staff an extra day off is high risk over a holiday weekend. So I think we've given enough opportunities for them to take vacation days. So sorry, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I also oppose doing this. I think we've worked hard in several installments, making the, you're bringing the employee, the compensation schedule up. I think we've done that several times. We've looked at the benefits. We have a number of paid holidays off, including some of the lesser holidays like Juneteenth, the Indigenous Peoples' Day, the holiday formerly known as Columbus Day, and I think President's Day is also a day off. So I think we're very fair there. I think it's reasonable to expect the employees to work that day. It's throughout Manitou. It's a day when really we start breaking at the seams. 4th of July. So it's certainly a busy day for the people who actually, for the private sector people who have jobs here. And I know during the first several months of COVID, I got several emails and several phone calls from citizens, and they were wondering why we had city staff on, why we weren't cutting staff since things were so dire, and the explanation was things are dire and we may have people out sick and so forth. So we're going to maintain our strength. And, people nonetheless, they expect the city employees to be there and work. And by and large, I think the citizens are happy with it. But again, I think the 3rd should be a work day. John?
I guess I want to ask a general personnel question. Do we have a set of like floating holidays that every employee has?
No, we don't have a floating holiday. We do have 8 hours, I believe, of personal time that you can take throughout the year. So there's an 8-hour time frame.
Okay, I guess the other thing that I'd like to just kind of throw out there is every once in a while, July 4th appears on a Wednesday. And so I just want to kind of throw that out there in terms of, do we think that when July 4th is midweek like that, should we be creating a situation where the city has essentially an employee is only working 5 days out of 7 because we're trying to hook this all together? I understand what we're trying to do. And I guess my thought is that maybe we ought to just create, at maybe budget season or something like that, a floating holiday policy that allows employees to kind of pick these dates when they want to kind of hook some things together. Okay. And where that makes a lot of sense to people. I think that's pretty standard out there in industry. And so it seems like to me, I'd rather kind of attack it from that standpoint. I guess I'm not opposed to doing it this time. My question is, a second question, Mr. Mayor, if you'll indulge me, is that for the employees that we do think are critical to work on that day, which I'm sure we have a list, you know what I mean, that have to work that day. When we declare a holiday like this, how are they paid? Time and a half, double time, what's going on?
So we do have our critical employees as police, fire. We have the pool. They will get holiday pay, but only for 8 hours. So they get the holiday. So like police would only get 8 hours of holiday pay. The other thing is we will have our weekend staff, which will be 3 individuals who will be on to manage all the issues in the town. And Roy is on call that entire weekend because I am out of town that weekend. So we have Roy being on call. So we have 3 of there are downtown improvement individuals that work every weekend and they'll be on at that time.
I guess specifically, I mean, help me with these people who are on mandatory duty.
Mhm.
How are they compensated? But because to me, when you take any amount of time, 4 hours, 8 hours, and everybody else has got the whole day off. Okay. All right. You know, I used to work for Federal Express, and I mean,
Mhm.
we had these strict things about, you know, not a glass of wine within 48 hours of being on duty. Okay. So that means during that time, you know, you can't just kind of have a glass of beer or something like that. And then, you know, the time clock's ticking on it. So specifically help me in terms of with somebody who has to work that day, how that for whatever it's 4 hours or 6 hours, how are they compensated? Well, everybody else has got the day off if we decided to go in that direction. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, let me pull up this email. So I just have it. So if you want to go on to the next question, let me pull this email.
I don't
and
have
I'll let you
another
know.
question, but anyway.
Okay, go ahead with the next question while I pull this up.
I don't have another
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry.
Let's go on to Natalie.
Sure. I'm comfortable with moving forward with this as a kind of a one-off, acknowledging that the dates will change next year. I'm also interested in the idea of floating holidays because I do think it's tricky when we determine which are the more important ones, which are the lesser ones, because I don't think that's true for each person or the same for each person. And that's it.
Okay, so you're not in favor of going forward with this?
I am in favor of going forward
You are
with this as a one-off this year.
You're in favor of giving them the day off. Okay.
So, yeah, Jeff just made a comment. You can make it whatever you want, but our current policy is if you're an exempt employee and you work that day, then you would get another day off. So you would get that. Non-police and fire, so non-sworn employees, they get paid, if they get paid $10 an hour, they gets a holiday and does not work on that holiday, they get paid the regular work day of $80 for 8 hours. If they work 8 hours on a holiday, they get paid the 80 normal pay, plus they get times 10. So they would get 120 for that day. So it
So
will cost us about-
basically, that last part is maybe a little too complicated for me in terms of understand this part of the evening, but it sounds like to me, generally speaking, if you work that day, then you can get, you can pick another holiday, right?
Yes.
Okay. I guess to me, you know, given the fact that we kind of dug our heels in a little bit about not, and inflation was galloping along at the first of the year. And I realize it's cooled down quite a bit, and I'm really glad about that. But we didn't do a pretty big adjustment. I guess I'm comfortable with, you know, making it a one-time thing and then looking at a floating holiday policy. Thank you.
In that case, it would appear that Michelle, Judith, John, and Natalie are in favor, and Nancy and I are again. So I guess we'll do it. We do have a policy statement as our employee handbook. So I guess our policy statements are subject to informal revisions. Okay. Receiver act on council correspondence. Anybody got anything? Okay, I don't. I guess nobody else does. Roy?
Yeah, just if we have some maps warranty being done in the maps area. So if you see the trucks out there and they're fixing the curbs. So we didn't like some of the chipping that was occurring. So we told them to fix those. So they're out there doing that. It was last week and this week. And then there was the issue about the kiosk and the 30-minute free. So there is a way we put a 30-minute grace period on the machines so that everyone gets their 30-minute free as well. So that should solve the problem that we faced when they were being charged and never got the 30-minute free parking. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Denise?
Yeah, I just sent out before this that we did get $25,000 from the Gates Family Foundation for the library. So another some additional funding came in for that. Tomorrow night, I'll be presenting, the mayor and I will be presenting at the Pikes Peak Library District Board meeting to talk about possible funding there. And on Thursday, I will be out most of the day, but have my phone with me on a CSU energy tour, which I'm excited to do. And then next week, CML, I think there's 4 of us that will be at CML on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, be leaving at 6 a.m. to head up to Denver to present for the DOLA grant of the $1 million. So that will be a couple of big presentations are coming up.
Okay. Right, thank you. All right, so our last item is an executive session. Let me go ahead and read the title, then I'll ask for a motion to go into executive session. An executive session for the purpose of considering the purchase or sale of property for public purposes pursuant to section 5.1B of the Manitou Springs Home Rule Charter concerning the acquisition of real property for open space. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Okay. All second. Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. So I guess we're going to vote electronically.
6-0.
Okay, great. Thank you. Judy, and then we're going to be joined by Tim Beeson and Nancy Wilson from OSAC. So do we need to make transition here? Obviously. Let's take about 5 minutes then and switch over to executive